Okay, good afternoon. I'm not sure if this is on. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is Monday, October the 4th. We are here at a board workshop. The time is 1:01, and the order of business is the Esser 2 allocations for 60 minutes. Next, the agenda review for October the 5th, and then the priority workshop topics. So if we could begin with the Esser allocation, and Dr. Spiro, if you could introduce everybody, so for those who do not know everyone.
Excuse me one second, Madam Chair, if I could make a point of order. I do have a hard stop, so I'm just letting everybody know that I need to leave no later than 3:59. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are happy to be here this afternoon, and it is a team, a coordinated effort to talk to you about Esser 2 funding today. And though Academic Services is here today presenting the bulk of what we're going to talk about with Esser 2, I want you to know this is actually every division has had a hand in Esser 2, and it has definitely been an all-hands-on district endeavor, which has really been led by our grants department. And so you're going to hear from Terry Kennedy and Lita Dietz. They're going to lead us off today and talk to us a little bit about a little bit of the history of our Esser 2. And then we'll hear from some specific departments about what the requests are with the funds, what the impact is at the school, and really what's our return on investment with that impact as well. So we'll have Shanna Fletcher talk about from the school development side. You see a lot of individuals from student services here. Jessica Duncan was going to talk to us about the student services support. We know how crucial that is. And we have various members from the student services team that will be here to answer any questions if they're specific to those itemized items. And then our curriculum and instruction team is here also to talk about the curriculum and the resources. And all of this, again, is around just Esser 2. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Kennedy, who's going to lead us off. Actually, I take that back.
I just want to, I apologize for some of us may have our backs to some of you, but we just felt that it was better to be able to have conversation with one another in this manner, so that's why this is the way it is. So I apologize for that.
And I like the you guys' closeness at the table. It actually adds to the conversation. So for us, we'll make sure we talk to you, and if you have any questions, please make sure just engage in dialogue with us. So Lita?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would just like to introduce myself as the new program administrator for Esser. And like Dr. Spiro said, we're here today to give you an overview of where we have come, where we are going, and how we got there. So at this time, Mrs. Kennedy.
Actually, second slide. Good afternoon, everyone. So we thought in starting with Esser, the best thing to do would to reflect on what did we do this past year with Esser 1. So the CARES Act, when the CARES Act came about, March 20 of 20 was the CARES Act approval. And through that, we were given 7 different allocations. Our first allocation was the Governor's Emergency Relief Fund, which provided for our summer school and extended learning during the shutdown. On Esser 1 was the second, and when they gave us Esser 1, that is the large allocation, which was over $21 million, they gave us only a few weeks to determine how are we going to spend that money, and they gave us assurances that we had to follow related to COVID. We did plan at that time for 2 years because that allocation was meant for a 2-year cycle. Then they provided the CPR funding, which was for the PPE. They provided civics, which was specific to providing every school with civics books related to, or from a list that DOE provided. Then we had the high quality curriculum for reading, which was specific technology related to reading. Data-informed support application, which was an allocation to provide for some specific training related to accountability and looking at the data to determine we're putting our resources in the right places. And then the last one was the instructional continuity plan, which provided for some training specific to if we have to close down again or go remote again, what would we do? What did we learn? What would we do? And we had to actually provide that instructional continuity plan. I believe it was provided to DOE last week. So that's the funding that came from CARES Act and included Esser 1. So then following Esser 1, in December of 2020, we had the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplement, which is better known as Esser 2. So in December of 2020, we were notified, okay, we have another allocation coming to you. So Esser 1 was going to be for 2 years. Esser 2, now we have to change our plans. So they actually sent the assurances and asked us to sign the assurances and sign for the $84 million in April, and then we didn't hear anything. In June, you'll recall that Budget and Finance did a presentation for you of an overview, a little bit of Esser 2, and at that time, we were told that this allocation was going to be a set of assurances, and we would just, as long as we followed the assurances, we did not have to provide a budget narrative. Well, then in July, DOE notified us that, no, we're going to do a budget narrative, and we're going to break the $84 million into 4 allocations. So if you look at the 4 allocations there, each of those are 4 different grants that are specific to what each of them has requirements for them. And some of that's what we're going to go over in a few moments. When Esser 2 came about, we only had a few weeks, and that's when we said, okay, we need to gather and create our teams. And that's when, as Dr. Spiro indicated, we brought every division together to say, okay, here is the funding, here are the assurances, what are we going to do with this money? So looking at the assurances, the data, how do we implement, and the time frame, that's when the plan was written. I do need to note again, we were told that Esser 1 was initially going to be 2 years. Now they're saying if you want to get your Esser 2 funds, you have to spend your Esser 1 funds first. So not only were we planning Esser 2, we had to go back and say, let's take some things that we've already spent, put it in, and we had to move things around from Esser 1 to Esser 2 and so forth. Some of the considerations that were taken in planning was House Bill 5101, which provided for some of the specific grants requirements. For example, in House Bill 5101, it does require that on the non-enrollment allocation that we create a multi-agency group, and that we, there's a couple of different provisions provided. So while we had our request for application that gave us all the details, we also had legislative things that were happening, as well as the DOE assurances. So it was a challenge. The other consideration, with every one of these allocations, we are required to provide for our charter and private schools. Private schools through our Equitable Services, and charter schools as a district school. So when we do that, each one of these allocations had to be provided the information, and then what are you going to do with it as well. So if you look at our charter schools account for about 10% of our student population. So each one of these grants, they were given approximately 10%. It was a proportionate share. With the exception of a couple, such as civics. Civics said, no, rather than a proportionate share, you're to give each school $1,027 each. So there were some variations. So one of the other considerations is the continued changes. So we would be given something to say, here, this is what you need to do, and then a few weeks later, no, do it this way, or change it to a different way of doing, of implementing. The Equitable Services, which means we provide to our private schools, it was a requirement for, and it is a requirement for every federal funding that we offer equitable services to our private schools. The exception will be Esser 2 and 3, and that is because the state is going to give that allocation. So it's going to make it a little bit easier for us because that's going to be provided by the state. So that's what we've done, and now I'm going to turn it over to Lita.
Yep, so now we are going to hear from each department in regards to what we have or how we have decided to move forward with ESSER 2 in regards to our tiered schools, student services, and classroom success. Mrs. Fletcher.
Good afternoon. I am representing school development today, and what I'm going to share with you, we already discussed a few weeks ago when we had the accountability report, and that is the proactive tiered support that we utilized back in May. So at the end of the third quarter progress monitoring last year, we saw some alarming data which indicated the mislearning that the last presentation was about. And so at that point, we decided we needed to go back and think about what we did with the differentiated accountability schools when we had the 23 DNF schools. We were in a place where we had to take some proactive action so that we could potentially not have that situation at the end of this year. And so what we did was we went back and thought about all of the resources that we put into place in those differentiated accountability schools to help support. And they're listed there on the screen for you. One of the initiatives that we do often is to make sure that we have an effective leader in place in our most challenging schools. And so Tice and Edgewood received last year a turnaround principal. And then something new that we did that we didn't do with the differentiated accountability schools was we added an assistant principal to Colonial and Franklin Park that had been through a turnaround experience. And so we're excited about that initiative. Multiple divisions were included in this decision, and we made sure that the classrooms in these schools were staffed before we hired the extra resources. And really, don't want to repeat myself because we kind of went over this at the last presentation, but we use the ESSER funds to purchase these resources for our most needy schools. We couldn't wait until the end of July to get FSA data back before we took action. And so that gave us the whole summer using Q3 progress monitoring data to be able to put some extra resources in the schools that need it the most. All right. So at this time, I believe we'll take questions so far before Jessica Duncan and her team come up.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Mrs. Duca?
On slide 6, what comprises equitable services? You mentioned equitable services, those will be paid directly to privates by the state, but what is that?
So equitable services is the law that says that we have to provide equitable services to our private schools. For example, with Title I, our equitable services that we provide is tutoring. So because these private schools are generally religious entities, schools, we can't provide directly to them, so we have to, when we have federal funding, we have to provide an opportunity for equitable services, and we have to actually have a consultation with those schools to discuss what is it that we are going to provide. So Title I, it's tutoring. Title IV, we've been a little bit more flexible. With these grants, it was a challenge because we're trying to determine what are we going to provide those private schools when we don't even know what we're doing ourselves. So every one of these allocations, so there's 7 grants from CARES Act 1 or the ESSER 1, and there are 4 grants from ESSER 2. So 11 different programs or 11 different allocations with 23 plans from the charter schools and then multiple plans from our private schools. Many of our private schools did not participate, and it is a very, some schools may have, on one of the grants received like $15. But it's still the added work of having to reach out and do all of that planning with them.
Thank you. Ms. Gittens?
Thank you for the am I on? Yes, I am. Okay, thank you for the presentation. A question I've always had, in my mind, the CARES and the ESSER funds were basically to ensure that that achievement gap did not get broader and broader and broader. Am I correct? So I was never sure why funding was used for civics, and where, to me, that's not the achievement gap as much as it is a program across the board. So can you explain, and I know that the funds there were very specific things that you had to use them for. So can you explain that, please?
So the CARES Act gave a lot of funding to the state, and then the state made decisions as to what we would do with those funds. I would tell you that Esser 1 was pretty much geared towards what you just said, the learning gap that was created due to COVID, and all of the assurance were tied to that. However, the state then had some part of that funding where they decided we'd like to do all these different things. Believe me, I would have preferred for them to do one allocation and let's do all of this, but they kept coming up with, different, here, let's do this now. And so the civics allocation was specific to civics, and so that came from DOE. I don't know where that kind came from, other than they just made a decision and said, here we go. There's another, and we don't want to lose out on any of those opportunities. So when it came, we just said, okay, what can we do to write this? And the civics one was very specific. It was all K-12 schools, but specific to, here are the books that you can order. That one was actually easy with charter schools, because I could say, this one is, here's the books you order.
And those funds were taken out of Esser 1?
Well, no, they were CARES Act. So CARES Act gave all 7 of those allocations. So one of the allocations from CARES Act is Esser 1, or the Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Fund. So Esser 1 is part of CARES Act. CARES Act is the overarching. And just like with Esser 2 and 3, the state gets a certain portion and they can come up with what they want to do. So far for Esser 2, or the CRSSU grant, that's all of Esser 2, and but they still have funds that they could come back and say, here's some additional allocations.
Do we have a way, I know we were tracking the achievement gap, pre-COVID and as we go along. Is there any data or ways to track how this funding that was meant to help with the achievement gap is actually affecting the achievement gap monetarily? Because, like before COVID, if the gap was this wide, after COVID, it's widened. So are we working on just getting it back to where we were? Where are we on that? And then still working on the gap that we had before COVID?
I would defer to Dr. Spiro on the Esser 1, but let me just say on Esser 2, we don't have the allocation yet, or we've just received part of it. One of the, I mentioned House Bill 5101, one of the requirements is to have a pre and post monitoring or pre and post test decided by DOE. We have yet to have approval from DOE on that pre and post. We're hoping it's ready because we've already done the pre-testing and that's what we're using. And I know that is a discussion that we're going to have, but I'll defer to Dr. Spiro on the other.
And I'm going to circle back to civics. So the civics was about civics literacy. And so with the new best standards, those books were tied to that civics literacy, and that was really the intent around that. In regard to what's going to be our return on investment, all of this, like for example, what Shanna Fletcher just shared with you, that these are the resources that we're going to be using with our Tier 3 schools to give them the extra support that they would need. We would be looking at a myriad of different data points to see, is this really being effective? For example, we are supplying a full-time nurse. Have we seen an impact to attendance rates, keeping students in school? What has been our progress monitoring in regard to academics when we have our full-time social workers at those schools? Are we engaging our families in a more meaningful way where they're more, get more of an impact with our schools? We have those coaches that were outlined up on there. Is that having a deeper impact on student achievement as well? So all of these, we have targeted students and schools that we're looking for, and the return on investment certainly we would hope would be an increase in learning gains, an increase in student achievement along the way as well. And then when Student Services gets up here with Jessica Duncan, and they're going to talk to you a little bit about what that would mean for students in that realm under Student Services, what the data points that they would be looking at.
And on the timeline right now, have we spent all of Esser 1 that we had to do in order to apply for Esser 2 is what you were saying? And now
Well,
we're waiting for that?
We have not. We're about to, and I'm going to cover that in a few, towards the end, as far as, I have a timeline for you and some more information to share with you.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Is there anyone else who has any questions regarding this particular? No? Please, thank you.
Thank you. And now Jessica Duncan is going to be joining us, and we're going to talk to you about Esser 2 and the area of student services and the supports that they're looking to get funded from Student Services from Esser. Whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon. So I'm going to speak to you today from the Student Services perspective. We know that the pandemic created an increase in needs across our area, so we had an increase in supports for health services, mental health, social emotional programming, attendance, discipline, and graduation. At the beginning of this school year, we had many students who had been accessing their education through virtual school or through Lee Home Connect. So some of the traditional data that we looked at, where we would look at discipline or graduation, was a little bit different with the information we had from when students were not maybe in traditional classroom setting. But we do know some things from our community. So like in fall 2020, Golisano Children's Hospital saw a 66% increase in pediatric emergency room patients who were Baker acted. So when we look at data like that, we know that our students need supports. So as we went through this process, the first thing we did is look at staff. So in this visual that's up there for you today, we did this as a way to categorize positions, but I just want to note that many of these positions have overlap. So if you'll see, like school psychologists are under mental health, but that's only one portion of what they do. They spend a lot of time evaluating students. They're part of MTSS teams. Under attendance, we have school social workers. Again, that's one part of what they do. They're also very involved with our mental health teams and with our family and community agencies. But we did put the positions in categories, so it would help you sort of see what we increased and in what areas that they might primarily be providing some of their services as related to Esser. So under mental health, we have licensed mental health professionals, school counselors, prevention specialists, and some areas there. And you see we have supports for behavior, health services in our schools, and then also in the COVID Command Center. Graduation supports out in the school and also at Grad Academy. Attendance across schools, and then one speech language pathologist allocated for ESE. Another segment of what we looked at was, in addition to people, what materials do we need and what supports do our students need. So we put several things into the Esser proposal related to discipline, attendance, and mental health supports. I'll let Ms. Brooks jump in on this piece.
Thank you very much. So with our mental health supports, it's important that we align our interventions with evidence-based practices, which is the expectation set forth by the Florida Department of Education. And one of the tools we wanted to highlight for you today is the MeBe Play Therapy Doll. And these are used by our mental health professionals, primarily for elementary school students to assist them. As we know, many of our elementary students struggle with verbalizing how they're feeling. And when we are working through the heightened anxiety symptoms that we're seeing, because of the pandemic. The Maybe doll has assisted us with the movable facial features, and as you can see from the picture, the different types of expressions. It just helps us to give them the opportunity to share how they might be feeling if they're struggling to verbalize it. So that's one of the tools we wanted to highlight for you today. And each of our elementary schools will receive one.
In addition, we have some school-based kits that schools will be able to use, and there'll be resources in these kits. And those will be kits for counseling, some for our MTSS with our Tier 3 students related to behavior, and then equity. And in our third area,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought we were doing this. Next slide. Oh, is that
That
on
was on-
trainings? I'm sorry. I didn't see that go. For student services trainings. So we have personnel, we have materials, and then we have our professional development component. So here are the trainings outlined and highlighted two to talk about today. One being teach. So we did a lot coming back to school with culture development and building that relationship with the student. We have some students who, if they were kindergartners, maybe had not even entered a traditional school building. So really working with staff and administrators on how to build that relationship, how to help students re-engage and come back to the school environment, understanding that we are going to have some students with challenges. So with our TEACH curriculum, that focuses a lot on de-escalation if there is a challenge. There also is a physical intervention component if it gets to that, if we need to involve that, but really primarily it focuses on de-escalation, relationship building, and working with the student. So we have that piece. And then in addition, we have attendance training in conjunction with Attendance Works. So what we're looking to do is really a district diagnostic where we'll be looking at all of our processes. We'll be surveying and interviewing all of our stakeholders related to attendance. We'll look at current data trends and how we collect and monitor attendance, especially critical during this time period. When we talked about positions, there were a number of social work positions, and 5 of those were allocated specifically to locate students who might be whereabouts unknown or were chronically absent. So we are focusing heavily on attendance because we understand the importance of getting students to school and having them come regularly in order to access all of the curriculum and great supports that they do receive in the school setting. Any questions on the student services?
I have one real quick one. You said everyone is receiving the Maybe dolls. So with those, is there like an instructions on how to use, and are they trained to use them properly?
Yes, absolutely. So each of our elementary schools will receive them. The school counselor will receive it, and our licensed mental health professionals, and there is training. Our own Sherry Wenzel has used them therapeutically, our mental health coordinator. She has used them therapeutically as well, and so they will be thoroughly trained in that.
Thank you.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Giovanelli, and then, yes, Ms. Giovanelli.
So what are the actual services that are for ESOL and ELL? Like what is the curriculum especially if they're coming from other countries and they don't speak English? So how do we try to get them up to speed quickly?
I don't know if there's somebody from, is there anybody from ESOL to speak to? Okay.
Did you need for her to repeat that?
No, we're just looking for the personnel that could best answer that question. So we will take that question down and make sure that somebody can get back to you on that.
Ms. Giovanelli, was that the only one?
Was it?
Okay, then Ms. Fisher, please, and then Ms. Vaughn.
So then with the training for the TEACH and other programs like that, how is that delivered, and then how do we ensure that it's being implemented with our students? And do we have any data regarding how many people we've reached to this point?
We do. I don't have the specific numbers of how many we've trained, but we do offer that now in different modalities. So there's a virtual component for ease of training. Additionally, this year, we have required that over the course of the year that all administrators be trained so that they are not only aware of what's happening in the school, but directly involved, that they've gone through the training process so they understand the de-escalation process and they understand the techniques. We do have to keep track of that and monitor and report to the state anytime we use those techniques with a student who has an IEP or a 504 plan. So we do have that information. I can gather anything you need related to that.
So thank you, and then that being said, then I assume this is mandatory for all schools?
All schools have to have a team with trained personnel, yes.
Do you know what we're doing to address, I was talking to a teacher the other day, she's about an 18 or 20-year teacher, and she teaches 4th grade, and she said that she has a significant percentage of her class this year has not been in a regular classroom for the full year since 1st grade. How are we addressing that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. I had a teacher who's a 4th grade teacher, and she said she has about a third of her class or more that have not been in a regular classroom setting since 1st grade, so that they're missing a lot of the building blocks. And maybe that's more of a academic services question. Thank you.
I think there's definitely a component for curriculum and academic services. I think when we talk about engagement, there's also a student services component. So we want to make sure that students can receive whatever health services. If they're coming from families where they need some outside services, we're working with those families to ensure they have access to food, that they can get to school, that they're not hungry, that they're fed while they're at school. We also, while they're in school, want to make sure they're engaged not only with the curriculum, but really by building those relationships, because that is of primary importance to students. And one way we do that is through our social emotional learning. And we have placed a significant emphasis on that in the last few years, and then have also addressed that through this Esser budget. Can let Mr. Bradley speak for a minute on that.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. So yes, we do offer social emotional learning strategies through a variety of means in our district. We have some direct curriculum in our schools through Sanford Harmony, through Second Step, and we, as well as teachers who create their own social emotional learning activities within their day. They are all aligned with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is perhaps the foremost professional body that reviews and really makes sure that curriculum and strategies adhere to standards for social emotional learning. And just a bit about that, many think that social emotional learning is about very soft skills, but in comparison to what our students need to be successful, not only in school, but in life, these are hard skills of self-management, things like prioritizing and focusing, social awareness of how to build relationships with others, and relationship skills, and then responsible decision-making, how to actually assemble criteria around which you would make a good decision. So these are all hard skills that are absolutely necessary for our students to be successful as they move on into college or into business or into creating a business.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Ms. Morgan? Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Vaughn?
Yes. I've gotten a lot of communications from teachers, and they make me very sad. I read a long one today from a teacher I've actually met in the past, and it was really a heartfelt letter, and they're drowning. So what I'm asking here is, for instance, attendance supports. I know that probably, I'm guessing elementary and secondary, it's been a lot on the teacher in the past. If a student is absent, to call the home, and of course, to monitor the grade that the student is making. But under the circumstances, at what point does that, and I'm just going to use attendance as an example, at what point does that become the job or the primary job, so to speak, for these individual students out of teachers' classrooms? It's, if you're a high school, if you're any kind of a secondary school teacher, you might have 150 kids. So what is being done in student services, and we can use attendance as an example, and there are other examples that we could use, to give some relief to the teachers?
So in the segment prior to us, you heard about Tier 3 schools and some of the additional supports they're getting with a full-time social worker and some other things to help ease some of that burden. So it is the expectation for a teacher to call their student if they see, a pattern or attendance. But there does come a point where the social worker can become involved, the attendance team at the school. Our department often comes involved when there's truancy, if there needs to be a visit out to the house. We also do things proactively through student services. So we had, prior to the pandemic, when there were fewer restrictions, and we have to look at how to do that again this year, but maybe a little differently. We had attendance campaigns. So one of the things we did at Edgewood was support parents, where we talked to every parent who came in with a student who was late. We worked with students who were, and parents, families who came for drop-off. We walked with the walking bus through the community to pick up students, and that was all spearheaded through those initiatives were spearheaded through student services. So we do support in those areas. Our staff is primarily out at school, so our social workers, psychologists, licensed mental health professionals are all school-based, so they provide those supports on site. But if schools do need additional help, we can support with our administrative team and student services.
Okay, and all of those are wonderful, but it doesn't quite answer what I'm asking about the teachers in the classroom who are already totally overwhelmed, not enough subs. Many teachers wind up not having a planning period for days because they're covering for other people. And my question is, when do those teachers, with the kinds of absentee rates that we have now, when do those teachers have time, and at what point? I can see, you're making a 37 in my English class, you give the call about the grade and all of that, but at what point does this just become an overall issue that a student services person would take over to give some support, some real support to the teachers who are literally drowning?
If I could add on to that, Ms. Vaughn, part of the Esser funds is allocated specifically towards finding out the barriers in regards to why our students are not coming. So what I'm hearing from you is, and I hear a lot from everybody else, that our teachers really want to focus on teaching. That's what we want them to do, because they also have to come up with ways in which they're going to teach the students that are chronically absent. So their job is even more difficult. So through our Esser allocation, we have a full-time social worker, school social worker at every Tier 3 school. Through the Esser allocation, well, part of that funded all the additional Tier 3 schools, okay? Then the other part is to add an additional layer of another social worker that is working with 2 schools just focused on breaking those barriers down. And what we're trying to do is something that we would do in the behavioral lens of a functional behavioral assessment, but it's called the CANS. It is I wrote it down so I didn't mess it up. It is a comprehensive needs assessment specifically for attendance. And really what we have to start thinking about are what are the complex nature of why our students are out, because that's the symptom. And now we have to figure out and dig deep to figure out what those true barriers are. So with the additional support for every Tier 3 school, that will bring forward a lot of assistance in that regard. But in addition to all of those pieces, we are talking, like Jessica Duncan talked about, what are those core instructional pieces that are happening in every building? So are we having PLCs specific towards attendance that monitors attendance and behavior? So it's not an individual teacher's role to keep digging at it. It's more of a comprehensive role. So we have the right people at the table, and they're focused on all of those individual needs. It takes a village to do this, obviously. And when we talked a couple of weeks ago, we had last year almost 6,900 students that were already chronic absent, 20% or more. It's a lot of students that ended the year that way. So we're adding that additional layer to support our teachers and getting our kids in the classroom.
And thank you for
help.
That. Well, thank you for that. However, I guess this really isn't your in your wheelhouse, so to speak. I'm just going to say this because I've heard from too many teachers that are leaving the classroom because they are so overwhelmed, and they're running all day, and then they have a long list of parents to call at night because of attendance, because of grades, because maybe discipline, and all those things. So it's not in your wheelhouse. I understand, and you're doing all that you can for other kind of support, but the bottom line is that we're killing our teachers. They're people 8 weeks in, and so I just don't know how we can get the message to the parents with the grades and with attendance and all of that, and find a way to take a little bit off the backs of our teachers who don't really have even planning time anymore.
Linda, you wanted to talk?
Yeah, if you don't mind, if I can just make sure I'm hearing it. I think what I'm hearing is it's the administrative or somewhat administrative-ish style of tasks that teachers may be asked to do. But the concern is that because the volume of absenteeism, well beyond what we typically would experience, the teachers, on top of the other exacerbated challenges they're dealing with, are also being asked to take on a lot of these administrative functions, essentially contacting families that they just don't have the time to do, or that as it's the inundation effect. I mean, is that kind of the concern of what things are we able to take off of their plate or find alternate systems? So if that's the correct question.
Yeah, because many of them, I'll add, many of them don't even have planning periods because they're covering for other teachers, or they're having to bring in, let's say, half of their friend down the hall. They divide it and they have an extra. So it's really, under, I don't even know what normal is anymore, but normal circumstances, yes, it's a very doable thing. But under this kind of circumstance, with so many absences, paired with they're being asked to do so much more, many times with no planning periods, some of them I've heard from all week. What can we do? What are we doing? Do we have support personnel to help?
Mrs. Vaughn, just for a second, during our summer meetings with our principals, we went through the strategic plan with them. And so from the middle schools and elementary, each one had a little different input, but I've got one of mine pulled up, so it's one of my middle schools. And so they do, the principal takes it on and does a weekly kudos to all the students that are there in attendance. So they're trying to take some things on. They do a Friday fun wheel at this particular school and give prizes out at lunch. They do the calling through the school counselors. So they do a blast out, just school messenger at this school. Then they do on each day, the school counselors, if they see a pattern, if they're not Q code for pandemic, so they do a call out to the students. They split that up. Some of the administrators picked that up at this particular school, and most schools are doing that, I'm going to tell you. So maybe the ones at this particular are not able to, the amount of, I don't know the reason behind that one. They did common day 1 and 2 lesson plans at the very beginning of the year. All middle schools did, to talk to the students about the importance in coming and what they missed and why it was valuable for them to be there. They reconvene weekly attendance, PLCs, and it includes the counselor, social worker, administration, dean, and the attendance secretary. So then they decide, okay, this is a pattern with this student, so these are on our high list, and we call and check in with them. We bring them down to the office. They're doing all kinds of things, so we're trying our best to mitigate the attendance issues. So those are just some of the things, and the APA tracks attendance to school, classrooms. They have cards in middle school, so they do, kudos cards to the kiddos for that. So those are the things we're trying to do. It is difficult this year. I'm going to agree with you. Students have not been in school for a while, and so getting back to the norm of being in class every day, but we are trying.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, just to, again, respect kind of all the sides of what I'm hearing on this, that was a good example of kind of some anecdotal, how a school individually is trying to innovate. What I think I'm hearing behind the question is, what are we doing to address it more from a systematic needs standpoint, and perhaps rather than just kind of like an individual school example, what are those prioritized list of the high yield strategies that are really attempting to offset this current critical piece, which is adding to that? And I think that's a fair ask of us procedurally, how we're looking at that across all of our schools. So I'm happy to sit down with our academic folks, and we'll figure out what additional things we are to try to ensure that our teachers, who we know and acknowledge are going through very difficult times, to help take any burden we can off through whatever creative mechanism we can.
Right.
Which systems are really working? Maybe it's the drive, just to diminish that. What role can students play in that role, and families? So thank you for offering that, and I appreciate everyone's attempt to try to.
Yeah, and I don't want to undermine everything that was said, but that is the crux of what I'm saying, that you have these people, they're working all day, going home and trying to make maybe dozens of phone calls. And I mean, there's a breaking point, and we're flat out losing too many teachers, and we've got to do something. It's a crisis. So thank you. And thank you to all of you, too.
Was that it, Ms. Vaughn?
Yeah.
Ms. Gittens?
Okay. When we look at the continual instructional, let me take this down, instructional vacancies list. And this last week, the one we received, I crunched the numbers, and it was like 58% was in one area. The question I have when you're talking about the program with counselors and mental health and all of those extra things that you're doing, are we looking at having a proportionate number of those counselors and staff members based on the needs in those specific areas? In other words, if you've got an area because of COVID, they have very few students that were absent, et cetera, et cetera. Are you making up the difference by adding more at another area that really does have a significant need?
I can address, based on our licensed mental health professionals and also our social work assignments as well, that absolutely we look at the absentee rates and truancy. For mental health, we look at the number of cases we have, unfortunately, our numbers of students involuntarily hospitalized under the Baker Act by school. And we assign resources based on all of the data points school by school that we analyze. And tier 2, the tier 3 schools, et cetera. We look at all of that in order to really place services for student response needs and support according to the need for those services.
Because, I mean, and I guess I'm looking at too, with the extra funds that we received to do that, was that allocated equitably based on that need? And I know with some schools, they had to share at one point a counselor or whatever. So are we looking at those schools, though, with that high need and high achievement gap, and maybe reallocating some resources at a school or a location where they don't have as much of a need? Are we shifting and making sure that's happening?
And yes, under Esser, we specifically addressed all of that based on those needs, rather than, look, we didn't just assign and say, okay, every school gets one of these. We looked at the data and the needs per position and role to ensure that we are addressing those gaps. Related to school counselors, those are staffed by their schools, but as far as district itinerants, we did look at that as a team, and we looked collectively. I was not just working on the mental health pieces and Ms. Clark on the social work. We looked across the context of health services, attendance and truancy, mental health, all of those supports. Am I missing any areas?
So you said the schools then are responsible for the social workers. I mean, not responsible, but that's more so driven by the school. Is that what you?
No, I'm sorry, I may have misspoken. The school counselors are staffed by each school location, and those are equitable as far as the budgets assigned and those pieces. I just wanted to say school counselors because those are staffed at their schools. Under Esser, with each of the itinerant positions, we looked at all the data points and assigned strategically, looking at those gaps.
And I guess when you're saying, okay, it's based on the amount of the funds that they have at that school, to me, that would have been a red flag, and maybe it is, that school needed some additional funds in order to handle that situation. So.
And I would be outside my purview to speak really related to the school budgets and how those are assigned for the school counselors. And so I apologize that I can't answer that.
No apology necessary, and maybe it's something they can get back to us. But if that is the case, then what are we looking at budgetary-wise? And are we looking to beef up the budgets in those schools that do need more counselors? And maybe, that can get back to us later on, but I would like to know something about those numbers. I have one other question, kind of on what Ms. Giovanelli was saying about the ESOL and the ESE students. Did you say there are specific programs to handle those situations? And I don't know if I just missed it.
Sorry. To respond to two pieces. One, as far as differentiated funding, and that's what school development was talking about when they came up here, that we did look at each school individually and differentiated support based on the needs in that school, including full-time social workers, like we talked about, full-time nurses, SCL coaches, to try to provide all those extra resources we need. Dr. Rivera was going to be here for today's presentation, but she yesterday her daughter gave birth to her grandchild, so she couldn't be here. So I'm trying to get Dr. Negron to come down and talk, because I don't want to ignore the ELL questions. Really what you want to know is, what are we doing for students that come into this country that are limited in English? What programs do we have to support them? And what are some of the supports that we've had? So I have some folks that are going down there to see if you could come join us so that we can engage in dialogue around that. So I don't want you to think that we were ignoring that at all. That's the only reason she's not here today. You can send her some well wishes.
And can I just say my very last thing here on the differentiated funding? Is it possible for us to get some type of a spreadsheet or showing how that is working in the different schools based on their tier levels?
Sure. I'd be happy to give you by school, show you each of the extra support that they had, so you could see this is what the tiered support, especially via Esser, looks like in each individual school, so you can see that.
And how do you match that, to need? Is need like achievement gap number, or?
It is, and so if you remember the last presentation, the team talk, you gave a rubric, and I can share that again in the weekly update, where they said, here was the rubric that we looked at, and they had a number of indicators to determine our tiered school support, what makes a tier 3 and a tier 2 school, and then that's how we tier not only the extra resources, but then also the support for content area as well. That's differentiated based around the need of their school. So I'll include that in this week's weekly update also.
if I may, I know Ms. Fisher has her hand up, and then Ms. Giovanelli. We are going on the hour now. We still have 10 more slides to go through, so if we can be really thoughtful when we're asking the question, that we ask the question so they can give us an answer, and we can move on to the next question. So Ms. Fisher and then Ms. Giovanelli.
Okay, thank you very much. I was just wondering, in hiring the itinerants and the support staff, well, with the ESSER funds, are we having adequate applications, and are there people available to fill those positions?
So these are, in everyday circumstances, critical need shortage areas. So they are challenging to fill. However, we continue to interview every week and continue to fill positions in each area. So I think in the area of, I have Mr. Bradley here who's been interviewing for nurses. We added 2 nurses last week, 3 the week before. So although there's still challenges there, yes, we are still getting good applicants, skilled applicants for all of these positions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Ms. Giovanelli?
And actually, I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of what Ms. Vaughn said and what Ms. Fisher just said. I've spoken to several teachers, and they are very frustrated and worked to death, they feel like, because they don't have the resources and the help that's needed to really do their job efficiently and effectively. One of them specifically has said, you know, why we need more assistance to help us for just the simple stuff that the students are behind over a year. And this was particularly a kindergarten teacher. She said that she's got kids that cannot spell their name. They need sight words help. They need to know their letters, and they need reading. And if they had assistants that would come in and help pull those students out, that could help them individually, because I guess apparently the resource teachers are all subbing because of COVID, so they're in classrooms not able to do what they're initially intended to do, so that where the need was. So that, you know, it presents such a problem because these students are behind over a year. So that was one of the, you know, the recommendations that some kindergarten teachers that I've spoken to have said, you know, just some everyday help would be, and even if it's just for, you know, 15 minutes, just to help those students, you know, that are behind. The other thing that she said that was really a problem was for reading and math. And I'm exemplars. Am I saying that right? I'm not sure. Like the tests coming from downtown, the tests don't match the textbooks. And she said that's really a problem. The curriculum is not even developmentally appropriate for the students that they have. So it's presenting a problem. And then something that she told me that I didn't know, and they used to have printers in their classrooms, or they shared a printer with maybe another teacher. Now the printers are out of their classrooms, and they're cut off at, like, she doesn't know, but she's saying $20. Then they can't receive any more copies the rest of the month. And it doesn't carry over if they didn't use $20 worth. They would have to, they start all over again come, you know, the beginning of the month. So they use a lot of copies, and sometimes they are out of paper, and they're not allowed to make more copies. I actually didn't really believe her, and then I asked around, and that apparently is true. So that was one of the things that that they felt that it's inhibited them to do their job, really. And so I said, I'll see what I can do. And this has been the perfect opportunity because it was something you said. I mean, they're just frustrated. And they told me also, and this is something that I didn't know, except that I've heard it several times, is that they're being asked to 30 more minutes be added to their day. And they said that is not going to work when they're still not having the supports that happen during the day. So to add the additional time is not going to assist the students. Nor the teachers, and they're just fried. They can't add 30 more minutes to their day. So that was another the thing that I wanted to bring up. And then they need true parent involvement. And I said, you know, you want to give me solutions. So she did. she said quarterly we should be having, and this is for the English language learners, because parents, because some at home they don't speak English either, and these parents are struggling, and this is really important to be able to help their student. So if we had like a quarterly, she suggested like having a quarterly training, and you feed the family, because I said you can't just have them come and be there for a long time. Have pizza and feed the family and teach them English, if that's how we can help these families in the class, at home, to bring these students back into the classroom to be successful, is what I think we're challenged to do, and I think we need to do it. And so I put that on there. One of the things that she recommended was the 7 habits of highly effective students, teaching the parents that she said education is key, and they must buy in order for it to be successful for our students. So that's all I have. Thank you.
That's great what you were saying, Ms. Giovanelli, and I don't know, Dr. Savage. I think that before COVID, Billis Elementary used to do that. They would bring the parents in and they would teach them as part of their culture of that school. So the parents were learning, and that's, I would say, probably 80 to 90% Hispanic there. But they had a huge participation. So it is the culture of the schools. So I think that is important, but right now we're in the situation because we do have COVID, so I don't know how we bring them in, unless we bring them outside and do a picnic, or I'm sure there's a way to do that, but yes, we do need everybody to be engaged to help.
Yeah, well, and we all know, the success of the child is the success of the family, right? So, whatever we can do to help them is really what we need to focus on that, and I'm hoping next year we won't have to talk about COVID, so.
We're all praying for that one. Thank you. Ms. Duncan, I'm not sure who's next. Did you page 17.
All right, thank you to our student services.
Thank you.
Yep. And moving on to classroom success.
So I told Dr. Negron we're going to put him on the spot here. So everybody, this is Dr. Carlos Negron. He works in our ESOL department. Ms. Stevenelli, our curriculum team is going to come up. They're going to talk to us a little bit about the exemplars, which was shared with you, and so we'll hear a little bit about that. I'm going to talk a little bit about later about the 30 minutes as well. And then Dr. Negron will talk to us about a couple things. One, talk to us about how they're engaging the parent community, which, as I just heard, that's a concern. So how are we engaging our parent community? 2, what are we doing with students that come to our country who don't speak English? What are the services and supports that we have for them as well? And then maybe a little bit about what are the Esser funds that we're using, because it's really about Esser. With the Esser funds we're using, how are we supporting our ELL students? And hopefully we'll use that as a conversation starter to see if that really gets to the crux of the questions that you have. Dr. Negron?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, in terms of parent support, in the past, we have offered parent institutes in 3 different zones, targeting specific needs of the parents. We know that families that live in the West are not the same, do not have the same needs as the ones that live in the East or the South. So we try to differentiate the workshop or the topics that we offer to them. There were some general topics like how to help your child at home if you don't speak the English language, and we offered a lot of techniques and strategies. We talked about graduation, like requirements. What can you do to provide that support at home if you don't speak the school language, in this case English? So we covered topics like basics as far as reading, foundational skills, materials that they could find around the house that were easy for them to support the literacy skills of the students, and many, many, many other topics. This year we're planning to offer the same ones, but we're going to do it through Zoom, because obviously we can have 60 parents, in one place. Have to keep that social distancing. But last year we did the same thing. We offer only one parent institute, and it was very well attended. And this year we're promoting this as much as we can. The ESOL specialists are going out to the schools. They're talking to the ESOL contacts. They're telling principals and assistant principals that we're having these parent institutes where we're going to touch on, again, graduation requirements, literacy skills, and many, many other topics like social media, how to protect their children and social media. A lot of these parents, as you know, that technology is maybe not their forte, and they don't know how to monitor that because they're not familiar with a lot of the social media that is out there. So we're also educating them on how to protect their children in that regard. So we're offering 3 parent workshops or institutes, that's what we call them, and we expect a lot of attendance from them because we're promoting this aggressively. In terms of support for students that come from, speaking no English, of course, we provide SIOP training, and I know you're very familiar with that. It's shelter instruction. That's when we integrate language and content instruction. So we don't separate English classes necessarily just for these kids. We have to integrate language skills within the content because they need to be included with the other students. That's how you develop a second language, when you're interacting with other students that speak the same language. There are different models. In this case, SIOP, or shelter instruction, is one model. Dual language is another model that also promotes bilingualism and English proficiency. But in our case, since we don't have that dual language, in the district, we do the shelter instruction approach. So we train teachers, and we have trained a lot of the schools and teachers this year. Also, we provide supplementary materials like Imagine Learning that is specifically designed for ELL students. We have other literacy programs like iReady and many others, Fast Forward and Reading Assistant, but Imagine Learning is one that we try to promote more in the schools because it's specifically designed for these students. We also have, we have Imagine Learning for elementary. And Imagine Math now is going to be offered at the high school level. It's the same thing. It provides language support and also technical assistance with a live teacher for the students that do not understand the concepts or maybe do not understand the language of the subject. In addition to that, we have Rosetta Stone in place. We have Fast Forward and Reading Assistant for those students that come at the secondary level that are limited in literacy skills, because we still receive those kids that went to probably 3rd or 4th grade in their native countries, and now they are in high school or middle school trying to pass all these credits. So Fast Forward and Reading Assistant, Fast Forward and Reading Assistant, it's only one program, provides that type of support for these students that are behind academically, especially in literacy. And besides that, we go out to the school. ESOL specialists go out to the schools. We train on interventions. Myself, I've gone out to a couple of schools actually that are very needy, high student populations. Bonita Elementary is one of them. And I have trained teachers on SRA Reading Mastery as an intervention piece for a targeted student population there, especially ELL students. So I've been going out modeling lessons, also working with students, training teachers, coaching teachers. Basically, that's the same model that the ESOL specialists also provide or support the schools with. That type of coaching model, modeling lessons, talking to administrators about data, what interventions best meet the needs of the ELL students that they serve in the schools.
And then, Ms. Kennedy, if you could talk specifically at Esser 2 about what has been earmarked for our ELL students.
And I don't have everything memorized, but I do know that there are para positions. I believe there was 20 para positions added into Esser 2, as well as, I believe, a few teachers, but they focused on paras to get more support in the classrooms. And one other thing that I know that I talked to Dr. Rivera last week, and she talked about the Imagine Learning. We paid for Imagine Learning from Esser 1 for last year. We have continued that service, and she uses her Title III funding to pay for the Imagine Learning, but she wanted to expand it because we had more students and she wanted to go further into all the schools, I believe it was. But I know that there is some request to have an amendment to add additional support from Imagine Learning as well.
So Imagine Learning and Imagine Math are both supplemental materials that are targeted for our ELL students. We have not only had the teachers have had training on that, we've now trained principals, assistant principals for curriculum, our coordinators with curriculum, because we've embedded them now into our instructional guides as well, but supplemental support, very targeted for our ELL students. When we talk about what specifically, there are some programs that support targeted for ELL students. Imagine Learning and Imagine Math are two examples of that, as well as Rosetta Stone that Dr. Negron talked about. Any other questions for Dr. Negron while he's here?
I thank you, Dr. Negron, for coming down here and doing this for us. Also, I know when you said, you spoke about having the Zoom meetings, how many do not actually have that? So, I mean, do we run into that where there's quite a few families without the ability to Zoom in?
Our students have. The digital divide, that's what I had in my notes. Thank you.
I mean, they can access it through, anything, cell phone, or this information is provided how they can, join our meetings. Unfortunately, we cannot, provide the face-to-face. I prefer the face-to-face because when we did it 3 years ago, I mean, we had it turn out like, even in the West, where the parents do not, attend a lot of these meetings, we had like 100 families. We're talking about like almost, 150 people in one, room. It was, what is it that you call like the stage? No, in the schools, right, the cafeteria, right. So we have 150, people there, and that was only on the West zone. So in the East, the South, the turnout was even bigger. So we had sessions, rotations, where we presented so many different topics, and the parents were like, now I got it, I understand, how the education system works here, much better than.
But the answer as far as Zoom and parent meetings, we are required with Title I schools to have the meetings, and during the lockdown, of course, they were all through Zoom. And I'm just going to tell you, we had some very creative schools with doing cooking with the principal to all kinds of things, and the participation from our schools on Zoom was often greater than what they had in person. So as far as eligibility, the students can, I believe the students could use their computers.
They can, which I was going to say. So remember, they could also use their child's Chromebook, and everyone has a Chromebook, so that's part of the way to mitigate the digital divide as well.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to go back to this one. Everybody does not have the Chromebooks. The high school kids have the Chromebooks, but if you're elementary, you're not taking those books home. Those Chromebooks do not go home with you and stay there. So yes, when we're in lockdown, I can understand that the family's there and everybody can participate because they have that computer with them. But now these kids are not, because I think we had this conversation last week and we asked that question.
Yes.
And we said that the elementary school children did not have theirs at home. So I just wanted to make sure I'm not losing my mind. And then Ms. Gittens has a question next.
Elementary.
Well, actually, I mean, I guess I can say I'm pleasantly surprised, but surprised even more to know that there's 100 families meeting in my district, and I have no idea and was not invited and know nothing about it. Especially, and I can only speak for me and my area, I have a lot of communication with different families, and especially with some of the ESE and and ESOL families, it's almost like a tiered thing in their culture. There's a group of people, and I know this last year when we had the different choices for Home Connect and all of that. I had a group of people to call me and say, okay, we are like the ones in the community that talk to the others. And this one lady said, they will call me and say, what does this mean? So there's this tier in there that we're missing out on. I did a Zoom call last year at one point with about 5 people, Spanish speaking, and just read and went over the instructions that had gone out. And they asked me questions. And there were words that we would know, but they said, okay, well, what does this mean? And I explain, well, it's this. Oh, okay, so I know how to translate that, and I know how to explain that to someone else. We were on a call for 2 hours just with them asking questions. I can't say enough and won't stop saying the way we communicate. It's almost like we, take Word and we get a document that's in English and we put it through the program and it translates it, and that just does not equate to the community. You're shaking your head. You understand what I'm saying? Yes. And they have the I call them like the whisperers in the community, and they'll say, Miss So-and-so, what does this mean? Explain this. I don't know what it's about. Right. And that person may say the exact same thing that you're saying, but they say it in a way that they understand it. So somehow we've got to tap into that middle level. And I don't know in anybody else's district. I'm in the community and talking with people and communicating with them. And if I were to know that you're having this event, I could help get more people there. I could help to get people involved in it. I don't know why I wasn't made aware of it. And it's not about me, it's about the community. So, and I didn't realize that the Parent Institute was specifically in each zone. Why are we not communicating that? So, I mean, that's my question.
I think that's two different parent universities. We have one that's here, and then you all are doing, so it's two separate ones altogether.
Institute, he said institute, universities here.
University Institute, yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ginelli. And Dr. Savage, you have
Well, just
something?
very briefly, because I want to make sure we have time to go through the classroom success as well, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate for this is such an important part of our community. One of the things I think might help as we're going through a lot of these really targeted strategies is that we kind of bring back, whether through the board weekly information or through a future piece, just kind of framing a lot of these initiatives and concepts around a results profile, so that as we are implementing this particular strategy, Imagine Solutions, so forth, anything that we can do that we kind of show, here's the target, here's the intention of the strategy, here's the percentage of students that we think we're targeting with this, and then here's kind of the result we expect to achieve. I think for us at this policy level, I want to be able to have a really informed, data-driven conversation with such a important segment of our schools, that rather than just kind of going through the various strategies we're implementing, that we really have a kind of a laser-like focus on here's what we're trying to implement, here's what we anticipate that we see the ROI for that, because these dollars are very important, and we want to make sure that we're speaking to that as well. So I think I just appreciate Dr. Negron being ready on the spot to come down and speak to all this just like that. So thank you for that, and congratulations to Dr. Rivera. But if I would say for our future conversations around this area, the more we can kind of really frame it around specific results and then specific populations, subsets within that population, I think the more we can talk about the data, I think it'll make it easier probably for us to really kind of analyze that piece and then evaluate some of these strategies and how well they're working for us at that ongoing basis, if that works.
That does work. And I also want to say to Ms. Gittens, I hear you loud and clear, because I never think you communicate enough. So every time you give that feedback, those are different avenues that we need to bring back to our team and say, hey, we need to make sure in our communication wheel, these are pieces that we need to include. So I see those as opportunities for us to improve on our communication. We're the second largest organization in Lee County. We're always looking to improve our communication, because you just can never do it enough, and in different ways to our community, because that's talked about too.
It's like someone just said previously that it takes a village. We are a part of that village. I am a part of that village that wants to help you get the message out. So use me, use us.
Thank you, Ms. Gittens. Okay, we have one more question. That's
just for Mr. Neg.
And then we're moving to the next.
Just one question for Mr. Negron. What is the biggest challenges that we have teaching ELL and ESOL students that are coming from another country? What's the biggest challenge for us?
Dr. Negron, that was, I think, for you.
For us, it's not all, because we tend to think that ELL students in general are the same. We have to understand that they're not the same. This is like spectrum. Okay, some of them come very literate in their native language, others, kind of a little bit literate, and others are like non-literate. at all. And when I say non-literate, is that they just went to maybe first, second grade in their native country, and now they're placed, in middle school or even high school. Like in South Fort Myers, we had a case of a student that didn't even go to school where she came from. So the challenge is more, I would say, for secondary schools than elementary. For elementary, I know that, they have to come to us, with the foundational skills in reading and literacy, but they can acquire those much faster because, they have that the gap in grade level is not that big as secondary. Okay, so the challenge, I think, in my personal opinion, is in secondary, where they have to learn all these concepts, pass all these tests that are high level, and when they can only just read maybe a sentence in their native language, much less in English. So I think that's a challenge, and that's why we're trying to promote the shelter instruction approach, where we're teaching language through content instruction. That's the best way to do it. Not just a separate English class where they're learning grammar, because they need to apply that to real life, also to academics, not in isolation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Spiro, if you can, or whoever's taking the next step.
Yes, thank you. And thank you very much, Dr. Negron. Our next team will be our classroom success, and that is going to be Dr. Bethany Quisenberry, Lori Houchin, and Candace Alivedo. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of plants over there. Good afternoon. Since my first slide is on primary curriculum coaches, I wanted to make sure that I addressed Ms. Giovanelli's question earlier in regards to the kindergarten teacher and then also the exemplars. So she is correct when she talks about our resources that are covering classrooms. We were very blessed last school year that we were able to implement through the K-12 reading grant that we received from the state, that we were able to implement a primary literacy coach in every one of our elementary schools, which is huge because in elementary school, you have 6 grade levels, but only 3 are tested areas, right? So in most cases, your resources go towards the tested areas instead of being proactive going towards K1 and 2. And as everyone knows, not everyone is a kindergarten teacher, right? And so sometimes it's difficult to find resources for our K1 and 2. And so by implementing those last year and implementing the structure with our team of training those coaches on the foundational pieces, we did see even through COVID, some of those really successful pieces in place. But when we got our data, as the executive team showed a couple weeks back, primary is the spot where we had the greatest learning loss, especially with our first grade students last year, which is our second grade students this year. When we go into the exemplars, we do not have exemplars for K and 1. Instead, they take what's called Dibbles, and it is a foundational assessment that they take 3 times a year, and it assesses phonics, phonological awareness, and then basic fluency. So at the end of kindergarten and in first grade, that is CVC words, so consonant, vowel, consonant words to start their fluency, and then once they get into second grade, it's passages. And so that's what they use for their exemplars instead of what I believe Ms. Giovanelli was referring to for exemplars. Exemplars for ELA start in the second grade, and they are very rigorous because they're written to the standard. And so because our students have had such learning loss, we have many second grade students that aren't reading fluently the way that they should be. And so those exemplars are difficult for them. I'll say I have a son in second grade, and he is not performing well on those exemplars because it is to the rigor of the standard. And so rather than us not teach to the rigor of the standard, we have to ensure that we are providing interventions for those students to get them to where they need to be. I also want to say that the exemplars, because they are written to the FSA specs, and on FSA, 50 to 60% is considered proficient. There is a grading scale that I can provide later to all of you. There is a grading scale where on 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, a 60% is passing because it matches up. So it might alarm teachers when they're giving that assessment and they haven't fully been trained on how they're supposed to score those, and we're working really hard on those communications and pushing that out through the Google Classrooms and through our coaches. But 60% again is passing. So if a student is scoring a 50 or 60, which as a parent would be alarming if you did not know, the rigor of the standards and how those are assessed. So I hope that answers a little bit of that question. So as I said, our data showed that in our primary grades, we had the most learning loss. And so through the Esser funding, we were able to advertise and hire primary coaches. So even in our department, we typically support, even though we write instructional guides and curriculum maps for K to 5, when we push in for school support, it is typically going to 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And so we were able to advertise a primary curriculum coach for ELA, math, and science. We have so far been able to fill math and science, but continue to advertise for the ELA. And then another piece, as you guys have probably heard me talk to iReady to death, but another piece that we were able to implement through Esser funding was our iReady ELA in math. We now have all of our elementary and all of our middle schools using iReady, and these are the 6 pieces of the system that we use as far as resources, progress monitoring, and intervention. So as you know, we use our diagnostic assessments for our progress or monitoring 3 times a year, and that creates a student learning path for our students based off of their individual needs. And then we also, through the program, have teacher-created learning paths, which means if my student is struggling with place value, but place value is not in his learning path, I'm able to push out a lesson, 1 or 2 lessons in place value just to kind of help him, to give him that extra practice. So teachers do have access to that. Teachers have a teacher toolbox that we link into our instructional guides for small group differentiated instruction. It's also linked to the blueprint, to the exemplars, so that it's standard specific. So if your students didn't master those standards, it gives you a lesson plan to be able to follow with those students for individualized or small group instruction. Growth monitoring is primary use for our students for MTSS or for our teachers and schools that are trying to have additional data points. So a growth monitoring is a diagnostic quiz, I would call it. It's just a quick check. It takes the kids about 10 minutes, and it gives them a scale score so that you're able to see if they're making progress in between those diagnostic assessments. And then our newest is standards mastery assessment, and we are using those for exemplars in 3rd grade through 8th grade, only for ELA. The reason why we have done this is because K to 2 is on the best standards, 3 to 5 is on LAFs. So it's very difficult for our department to create assessments, as well as 6 to 8, to create assessments just for this year that are going to change for next year, as well as we don't have the data to support those assessments. And so we're able to utilize iReady Standards Mastery that have multiple research points and data to support that they are to the rigor of the standard, as well as they meet our students' needs. So for this year only, we will look at it again for next school year. We're using those for our standards mastery. And then of course it covers our professional development. iReady is an amazing company for professional development. All of you had a training with iReady. They train our principals, our assistant principals, our coaches, and then every school gets at least 4 school-based trainings every year.
Additionally, Esser funds our Connect with Lee for after hours. And so this is to provide additional one-on-one like tutoring or homework help for students who may be struggling in their classes. It's a way to mitigate learning loss. It's available for all students, kindergarten through 12th grade. We offer sessions for every day that school is open, Monday through Thursday. The times are up there available, and as of September 24th, for this year, we've serviced 2,880 students and families collectively.
So on the next slide, something that we implemented last year, so March, same time we did Connect with Lee, we also started back on track for high school credit recovery, because one of the things we learned is a lot of students were losing credit for one reason or another. This allows flexibility within our schools. It pays for teachers after hours to work with students via Edgenuity, so it's a learning online platform that we use to recover credit. So schools have the ability to utilize this in any manner that works for them. A lot of the teachers last year did it directly after hours. One of the changes that were made this year is, if you notice, it says Monday through Saturday. We do have one of our high schools that offers this on Saturday with several of their teachers who are working for them Saturday. And we also have one of our high schools who does Zoom late night hours from 8 to 9:30. And that's really to help with our students who are athletes in clubs working, but still need that additional help. With Edgenuity, because it is an online platform, we know that doesn't meet the needs of all of our learners, and they really need a teacher they can connect with to help motivate them, check in with them, and provide that additional support. From fourth quarter last year, take a pause in the summer, and now just the short time we've been at school this year, our students have recovered 528 courses. This is really important because of the graduation requirements and making sure that everything we're doing is for the students to be on-time graduates. So we were excited to be able to continue this utilizing the Esser dollars. The next one is one I haven't had the opportunity to share with the board previously. This is specific for our 11th and 12th grade students and those students who are in reading. Because the dollars had to be used in response to COVID, we have seen a lot of our students in 11th and 12th grade, they have not had the opportunity to meet their graduation requirement in ELA. Those requirements have been waived the last 2 years that came out. We don't have that same ability, so our students, we need to provide them every opportunity and resource for the students who have not passed their grade 10 FSA ELA to earn a concordant score in another means. So in our 11th and 12th grade reading classes, we purchased ACT and SAT resources that really walk through the different subtests, and teachers have those tools directly in front of them to work with students on what is being asked of them while still aligning with our district's scope and sequence. They go over those test-taking strategies, they're able to differentiate. And then in addition to it, we're able to provide students the opportunity to take what we call an SAT school day, where it's a non-reportable score that they can earn the concordant score to meet the graduation requirements. In addition, all of our 11th graders are provided with an SAT that is reportable to colleges. So you're going to notice up there it says college benchmarks and graduation concordant scores, because we're still focused on both areas, but those were the resources to help mitigate some of that learning loss as well.
Thank you. And then finally, this piece I want to talk about, I want to start off by saying what I'm going to talk about has to be bargained, has to be brought to the table and discussed with both of our TALC and SPALC. But we are having a conversation about using ESSER II funds to increase the student learning time for staff and students. When would that take place? When would we start that? Would all depend on the success of bargaining with both TALC and SPALC. We are earmarking it in this funding because we have this opportunity through this particular grant to support increasing student learning time. However, I can't stress enough, if there are teachers out there that are listening, there is a process that this has to go through. But because this is in the funding, we want to be very transparent about everything that's in ESSER II. We want to make sure we share with you. We are going to engage with our unions about increased learning time for staff and students. My teachers that are out there listening, give your feedback. Give your feedback to Mr. Daly. Give your feedback to Kerr. Let them hear Jamie Michael. Let's give feedback on what your thoughts are about this. If it works and it's successful through the bargaining process, then we would look at increasing student and staff learning time. If it is not successful, then we would look at reallocating those funds to support something timely inside of our own organization. But we want to let you know we are engaging in that conversation, and it's very early.
Thank you. Dr. Spiro, was there more, or?
Looking to see, I believe Ms. Kennedy has the last piece just to talk about the final part of the grant, and then we'll have final questions. Ms. Kennedy.
We'll go ahead on the. So I mentioned a timeline. I think you've seen this timeline before. We are, again, Esser 1, we are in the process right now of making sure that all of Esser 1 is expended. Originally, they said they would not allow us to use Esser 2 before Esser 1, but that has since changed because US DOE says that we can. Go ahead to the next slide. And what's our next steps? So in following up with what happened with Esser 1, we're working on the 7th Amendment now. So these documents, what you're going to see as far as for the approval on Esser 2, all 4 applications, it's a document that was written in August. And since then, we already have changes. So what are the next steps? We are looking at adding, once it's approved, because of the application, there's 2 of the 4 that have been approved. The academic allocation, which is pretty much covered everything in the last presentation with Lee Connect and the SAT and some of the other things, all of those have been approved, but we're still waiting on 2 of them. So the lump sum, which is the most of the allocation, it's still being reviewed in DOE. But we know that we're going to be doing an amendment as soon as we have approval, and because that first amendment's going to need to include our $7.5 million bonus that is coming from the MOU that was approved, as well as we wrote in an amount for insurance. I believe it was $3 million or $3.5 million, and that's increased. So this is our first amendment to include the, as I mentioned earlier, the Imagine Learning. So as Dr. Spiro mentioned, we have the ability to make the changes through the amendments. And some of the things we put in there, they may not get approved, so we don't know yet. I think there's one more. So we also have Esser 3, or the American Relief Plan. The American Relief Plan was March of 2021, and it does require, going back to some of the requirements, this particular plan requires that we have public input. And so we have time. So we're in the process right now of working with communications to create a survey and survey our parents and stakeholders. And we will also be developing a website that will show how the allocations will be used. We do not have direction from FLDOE as to when those funds will come or what are the additional requirements. We have the assurances from US DOE as to how the money can be spent, but again, we've had the assurance in the past, and then FLDOE adds some additional requirements, as you've seen. And I believe that's it.
And before we take final questions, I do want to thank Ms. Kennedy and her team. There is a lot that has been thrown at her in a very short amount of time in regard to Esser 1, CARES, Esser 2, and now Esser 3. They have done a really remarkable job engaging all of the divisions inside of the district for us to really look at what are the needs of our schools and our students and try very much to be remedied to some solutions for that. So I just want to say publicly, thank you to you and your team.
Thanks.
And I'm going to please say again, it is now 2:37, so we're already 37 minutes over. So just think about that, please. Ms. Gittens, and then Ms. Patrica.
Okay, a couple of quick questions. Thank you all for the report. Appreciate it. On the two things kind of go together. On slide 24, where you're talking about the Esser timeline, and in that first one, the first line, it says, Lees have until 2024 to obligate the funds. So in other words, that says to me we have 2020 to 2024 to decide where we're going to use it. What is that end line of using it? Is that line at the end that's 2025?
I believe it said September. I know the timeline shows this, but I believe it's September. But we are actually, when we're planning, we're trying to, originally when we started planning, we did the 2 years. Then we started planning out to try to incorporate all of these years, because we know that some of the initiatives, they're going to carry on for all 3 years. So, but I don't know, I believe the September of 2024.
25 is...
I mean, 25.
Is going to be it. I hope...
We don't actually have the RFA, or the request for application, that gives the specifics on when is this grant good for. And I can tell you that what we get from USDOE is not always, what we get from FLDOE is not the same. So for example, the funding, the act actually required that the state give us the funding within 1 year of receiving it, and we still have yet to receive it. And American Relief funding, the requirement with that is that they have to give us the funds, the state is supposed to give us the funds within 60 or 90 days, and we have yet to receive it, or even information as to what we need to do. That could also be held up because the American Relief funding was, we were required by, the state was required to submit a plan by June 12th, and they did not submit the plan. Okay. So I think that there's 5 states that have not, so that's going to possibly hold it up as well.
2 quick questions. I'll tell them both at the same time. The first one is with the Esser funds and the allotments and the things that we're required to do or not do. Does it matter whether it's a new or an old program like we've been doing iReady forever? So we are allowed to use the funding for programs we had before just to beef them up? That's one question.
We've actually, I'm sorry.
Okay, and the second one has to do with, I think it was Dr. Quisenberry that talked about Dibbles. And what I'd like to know, and you can answer it later, since it is more of a fluency and similar to the progress monitoring, is it, do you see that as similar to progress monitoring, so we're kind of in line already for that type of testing to come with Dibbles? And you can answer that later, so.
As far as the progress, I can't speak to Dibbles, and I apologize, I just...
No, I didn't expect you to.
But your first question, what was your first question?
The first one was about using ESSER funds if we're allowed to use it for existing programs.
So that's a good question. On our title grants don't allow you to supplant. This grant, we're allowed to use the funding even for things that we've already been doing. So we've actually looked at that, and if you look at within, I don't know if it was ESSER 1 or 2, we actually provided for some of our reading coaches from there to free up the funding. But yes, we can continue. iReady's not new. We were able to expand on it, so we are able to pay for it through that.
Thank you.
She can answer Dibbles.
On the iReady question as well, this is the first year that we're actually paying completely for it. So iReady, we have a great relationship with them, and so we were able to have multiple pilots. And so this is the first year that we're paying the full cost for all of the schools and all of the pieces. For Dibbles, I think what you're asking is for the new state progress monitoring, like whether or not that would match up.
Do you see Dibbles as kind of an equivalent to progress monitoring in that you're testing in sections? And
yes. So Dibbles is specific to the foundational skills for progress monitoring. However, it does not test all of the standards for progress monitoring that would meet the state's requirement for what we are moving into for the 3 progress monitoring pieces. The state used to require us in, I believe, at least kindergarten and first, it might have even been further, to give Dibbles. That used to be part of, it was a PMRN platform, right? And so we use that for intervention in our, as a different progress monitoring system that is much more specific and systematic in K1 and 2, and so they don't just progress monitor, they then are provided with specific interventions to do with those students. And so during their core, they continue to teach the standards, and in that small group, they're giving intervention to the standards, but then in their actual interventions, that Dibbles assessment gives the teachers the data that they need to be able to give them the interventions specific to those foundational standards, such as rhyming or onset in rhyme or beginning sounds, that iReady might not give them such specific data.
Okay, thank you very much.
Ms. Patrica?
So I want to thank Dr. Savage for putting staff in front of us today. I always walk away from a workshop where I've heard from staff and I've seen staff shine, feeling so much better about the services that we're providing to our kids. And as some of my colleagues were speaking about the challenges of teachers in the classroom, I saw a lot of shaking heads among staff, which means this isn't the first time you've heard about the struggles of teachers and various suggestions on ways to implement changes or come up with programs that will work. So I wonder whether we have done school culture surveys so that we can see sort of thematic issues coming out of schools to make sure that we are, in fact, creating programs and providing supports that are addressing the needs of the majority of teachers as opposed to a story I might hear here or there, right? That's just one question. Thank you for the Lee Connect numbers. Those were particularly helpful to me. I have thought frequently, I wonder how many kids are using that, and it was like you read my mind, so I appreciate that. I offered to my colleagues, I'm sure you all have heard this as well, that the narrative coming out of Tallahassee as we go into session is that we are overflowing. Our coffers are overflowing with cash, and so they don't need to really do anything to increase our budgets for next year. So what you provided us today arms me with the information necessary to advocate for our kids and for the additional resources that we will need above and beyond COVID. So this, you really brought together for me what is a multi-layered, very difficult issue. And the other thing you illustrated for me today is that we are continuing to build the plane while it's flying, right? So that was so much of what was impressive to me last year for staff was how you were able to provide for the needs of our students in such an unprecedented time. And I hear 7 amendments today on something that we've already been doing for so long. So the pressures that you're under in terms of having to keep up with the changes coming from the state don't go unrecognized, if that makes sense. I'm very appreciative. And the final thing I'll say is I love, love, love the increased student learning time. I know that that is going to be a bargaining issue, but when I look at the perennially high-performing districts like St. John's and Sarasota and Collier, they all have that additional 1.0 for operating. And that's what they do with the money. That's one of the things they do with the money is increase that instructional time, and it's so key to helping our students with their educational outcomes. So I'm very prayerful, not that a prayer is gonna get us there, but I'm super hopeful that, that we can get there for our kids because I think that's really gonna help kids across the board. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you.
It's fun.
Really, really quick, Ms. Patrica was just talking about that extra 30 minutes. I just wanted to clarify, would this be kind of a revisiting of what we looked at a couple years ago in terms of maybe changing the number of class periods?
So 2 different topics. One would be the extra 30 minutes across the board for staff and students, which is a bargain topic that needs to take place. The other topic is the 7-period day versus the block, which is the master schedule for the secondary. I will tell you that Mr. Simmons, he's in the audience here. I know he is engaging with his principal leads. Actually, the meeting is this week to reignite the conversation now that we're further along with COVID about looking at the bell schedule as a possibility, and certainly lessons learned from the conversation 2 years ago, and then how do we engage our community in those conversations. So I do know they are in the conversation about that as well right now.
Yeah, you read my mind on how are we going to avoid what happened last time, and the only thing that I would add to that is it's really too bad we didn't start this last year, because I look at it from the point of view of we had a lot of complaints by the students that were taking advanced classes, especially high school advanced classes. And when they know 2 years in advance, they can make those adjustments. But those kids that are entering their senior year next year, should it be a change from 8 classes a day to 7 classes a day, there's going to be, just like there was last time, really, really frustrated kids. So hopefully we did learn from the last experience, but apparently we didn't learn from that little piece of it, because that was a huge issue for.
So and remember, we were asked to put that aside because we're in the middle of the COVID-19, and really focus on that, which is why we figured we had the conversation over the summer. We wanted to get the school year started, and that's why we reignited that conversation.
I understand, but that COVID or no COVID, that does not take away the issue, and it's a very real issue for those very highly motivated kids that will become very frustrated that here at the end, maybe even for some juniors, that they might have planned differently if they had known a year in advance, instead of like we did last time. Here it is, time to pick your classes. Oh, look, it's changed. So I'm all for the extra learning time. I don't think we have enough hour or time in the day, but anyway, enough said.
If I could say one more thing about Esser, just for clarity's sake. Remember, all of these 3 acts are different: the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Act, the American Relief Funding. They provide different funding. When we talk about Esser is the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funding, so we're talking K-12. So understand that while we have, in this case, the Esser 2, the technical colleges and the Head Start, there are other funding that they receive as well. But what we've been talking today about is all K-12, Esser.
Well, I just want to thank you for the presentation, and obviously this was a great subject. We're an hour over. A lot of questions, a lot of concerns. So thank you for being here and to answer all the questions that everyone had. Really appreciate it. I'm sure there'll be more to come, but I just appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you. Savage, we are up to you now. Yeah,
you're on the agenda review. While we're transitioning, just wanted to again thank the team. Also, just reiterate.
All leaving us?
I know we got quite a group out there. But one thing, just for the board's knowledge, just to ensure you all know as a board, it's so important that as we do settle in on specific funded initiatives, that it would be our full intention also to have real data-driven responses to all these aspects, so that you kind of understand how many kids are impacted, what's the target population, what's kind of the desired impact of those strategies. It's very important to have that so that you at a high level understand that with all these strategies, there's a lot of intentionality behind it as well. So just know that'll be a piece of everything here. It's just while we're still in, as Dr. Spire mentioned, bargaining and so forth, we really don't want to get ahead of ourselves in any of these ways. Also, just want to give an example of something that Ms. Patrica brought up I thought was very powerful, and it's, I'm going to reference Esser 1. There's a good example. We've been under tremendous pressure to expend these Esser 1 funds. Peer pressure. Why haven't the district spent all those funds? And yet, in reality, we would have had up through the end of next September to obligate that one body of funds alone. So it just kind of goes to show that it's really important that, while we're under pressure to have spent it all already, we actually had all of that, a whole nother year essentially, to obligate those funds. And so that's how Florida, you'll have to, if you have more information on that, we're happy to kind of share more additional detail of how Florida stacks up with the rest of the country in terms of this piece. But it does go to the heart of one of the big concerns we always have is, and it talks about that supplanting function. So we didn't get a lot of chance to talk about that. That's very important because any additional funds that we're spending, we want to show you why we're doing that, and not necessarily eating away at recurring expenses that we fully expect the state to fund. So for that, I just wanted to offer you that.
Thank you.
I think we're now to the agenda review.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the very first item that was questioned was H2 on the consent, and that is under Academic Services. The question, this is for H2, approval of the academic affiliation agreement with Advanced Medical of Naples. The question was, why don't we collaborate with local Lee County facility rather than a Collier County? The response actually is from Brian Granstra. So, Mr. Granstra?
All right, good afternoon, Board. It's an excellent question. And so this actually is the only agreement we have with the Collier County Medical Agency. What happened several years ago, there was a high number of students from Collier County in our Fort Myers and Cape Coral Technical Colleges. At the students' request, there was an agreement made with the Collier County-based medical agency. And so that's been a very positive relationship for our students who are over there. So we've kept this relationship. So this agreement allows us to continue with that relationship.
Okay, Mrs. Giovanelli?
So do we have the same relationship locally as well then for our students here in Lee County?
That is correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Dr. Savage?
All right. The next piece, this is for H5, H6, H7, and H8, again relating to the Esser 2, much of which we were just discussing here. The question was, please explain these Esser grants. This was pulled from the prior agenda, and I would like to know why. How does it help Lee County School District, and what will these grants and funds support? I would like a detailed, itemized list of the curriculum and resources, as well as how this will help our students. Dr. Spiro?
I think that explains it.
So this was, he just addressed these, so are there any
Mostly
questions?
everything was answered today, I would say, so other than a list of the actual programs, but we could get that later too. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to provide that in the weekly update.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, the next questions are...
That's about 6, 7, and 8 for her, for Ms. Giovanelli. Do you feel the same way?
No, it was one question for all, but Dr. Spiro, also the reason why it was pulled is because it changed, right? And I just wanted people to know that. It was just more awareness, because I think it's changing often. So, so I want people to understand that, that's all.
Yes, about the amendments and whatnot. Yes, absolutely. All right, item I1, this is under Business Services. It's approval to remove items from the official property records. There were 2 questions here with some parts. So the first one was, where are the 8 items that cannot be located? Also, please advise what happens to these items that are beyond repair, pianos, golf carts, and buses. Do we resell for repurposing? How do these items have no value? Please explain. And we have Dr. Desimore, who is here to answer those.
And I'm sorry, I wrote that, but it was where were they at when they were missing? Not where are they, because obviously we don't know where they're at. So I'm just trying to find out where were they, where did we lose them at? Where did we lose them, from here or a school, where?
I gathered that from the question. I was hoping that's what you were asking.
At 3 o'clock this morning.
Because I didn't want to sound like I was coming up here being smart, like, well, we don't know where they are, right? So, no, I did get that. So there was one item that was from Lehigh, of the unable to locate, one item that was from Lehigh Elementary, 4 items that were from James Stevens, and 3 items that were from Diplomat Middle. The items that don't have any value refers to the book value of the item, right? So an item gets put into our financial records at its cost, and then it's depreciated over a period of time, very standard through generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP. So at the end of that specified period of time, it's got a 0 value in the books, in our financial records, and that's what you see listed. So that's what 0 value means. It doesn't mean that we can't get a value from it if we sell it. It's just what the value is on the books. Let's see. When items are written off, some of them are, there were several questions, so I'm just going through them. Some of them are auctioned, some of them are just disposed of, and some of them are stored in our warehouse awaiting some type of disposition. So to be honest, at this point, we don't have a great uniform way of disposing or selling everything that gets written off, and we're working on a more comprehensive way to do this.
Yes, Ms.
Okay, I'm not going to ask where they are, but
I want to know where they're at. Who has them?
Who's hiding it? Where's Waldo? The question I have, when you have I don't know if you'd call it a pattern, but if you have several items from one school, is there some type of a red flag that says we need to follow up or do a little bit more with this school as far as maintaining? And I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble, I'm just asking, is that the process?
Yes, so thank you for asking that question, because that is the process as we, our property record staff go through and analyze, and as each inventory is done, a principal would need to respond in writing to any items that are unable to locate from their particular area, which they do, in which case there would be research that goes through to determine, okay, what happened to it? Is there a systemic issue? What could be going on? Do we have a good process or procedure in place in order to account for our inventory items at each school? But just to give you a picture of what that looks like, last year in FY21, we disposed of almost 3,300 items, or wrote off, I guess I should say, about 3,300 items across the district. And of all of those, 6 of them were unable to locate. So that's 0.2% across the district last year that we're unable to locate. So when you look at the information in its totality, our locations do really do a good job of tracking their inventory and making sure that we are accountable for that. And there are very limited circumstances in which things come up as unable to locate.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. If they do pop back up, will you please let me know?
We sure will.
I can also say very personally, from a personal example, having been one of these principals who had to account for it, you would sometimes get an item that was acquired under administration prior administrations ahead. So, I had one particular one where I got that report. It had been missing for that period of time, where all of a sudden I had to account for it, and it wasn't the prior principals, even the principal before that. And I called that person. They were no longer even working in our district, and asked them specifically which teacher they assigned it to, and had to hunt those things down, because it shows up from our standpoint, then I'm accountable for it, even though I wasn't there when it was acquired. So it
does say James Stevens. So
well, there you go. So I may. Let me see. I'll have to look at that specific item.
Check the garage. Check the garage.
This is actually for Ms. Bruno. So do we have a policy in place that we, because they're talking about protocols and they're trying to establish something, do we have anything to guide them in that, and what our expectations are? Because obviously you're all kind of...
I believe what Dr. Desmar was talking about is in terms of the specific items themselves, if it's going to be auctioned or warehoused.
Right.
I think that's what she's saying, that they are working on a process document or some type of guidelines for that. We don't have anything specific in our policies right now that address that.
Okay. So, and the reason why I ask that is because, it's a large list, and we get it every, so often. So, was it a quarterly? I don't know, we get it periodically. And I know, like, the buses, I would be curious what we're selling our buses for. So how do we get, for accountability and transparency, how do we see, what these things are selling for? And so it's revenue back, right? Even though it's a loss on the books, it's still revenue back. So
I think, Dr. Savage or Dr. Desimore, I think I recall Mr. Trey Davis would come to us and tell us what. Yes, thank you. I recall Mr. Davis coming back to us when they sold different items.
Computers.
They would come back because they would use that funds to do whatever. But we were always given what that amount was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something government, something that government deal or something.
Gov deals, right, is where we sell most of the technology items that are written off, correct? And if the board was desirous of the information, we could come back, periodically, quarterly, whatever, with a report that shows, okay, of the items that we wrote off that we've sold, how much revenue we received from those, if that's what you're asking.
I think, I believe that's what was being asked, and I think that would be a great idea to do, because that way we understand that this was here, and now we have X amount of money from that.
So,
right.
If that's something you can do.
I'll just add to that. I think the specific question in terms of whether or not there's supposed to be a report, there is supposed to be a report at the end of the year. I think what Dr. Desmar was talking about is the process in terms of which one are we going to use, the auction or put it in the warehouse and things like that, because there is something that is addressed in board policy 6.12 that does talk about that report at the end of the year.
Thank you, Ms. Bruno.
And I don't even know if we should get it like in a weekly update whenever they get it. I don't know, we get so much information, it's so hard to remember everything, but I just thought I'd bring it back up.
Thank you, Ms. Giovanelli. And
Ready for the next item?
yes, please.
All right, very good. I-5, the approval of a tax anticipation note. The question was, please explain this note. And again, we have Dr. Desmore.
Yes, so this note, the tax anticipation note, or the TAN as it's referred to, is a short-term borrowing to facilitate the cash flow for the district until we begin collecting significant amounts of property taxes, which is our main source of funding, in late November. So while we do have that budget, right, of different revenue, and of course our budget is balanced, when the cash rolls in is a completely different story. So this is to cover any short-term cash flow issues that we may have between now and late November, when we'll start seeing significant collections from property tax. And it's a pretty standard borrowing among our governmental agencies. If you all recall, we did one last year as well for a little bit more than what you're seeing this time.
Yeah, and just thank you. Some people don't realize that, and I just like to bring it up. I think I kind of do every year. Our taxes are paid in the arrears, so therefore there's a lag, and that just helps that. So I just like to bring that to, so people know. Thank you.
No, thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
Dr. Savage?
Yes, ma'am. It's J1, approval of personnel recommendations. General, the question is, what was the correction regarding Forrest Walker, Allen Park Elementary, correct September 8th, 2021, board agenda transfer effective date from the 15th of September to the 20th? And then why were there so many reclassifications from paraprofessional education, basic, ESE, ESOL to paraprofessional educational instructional support? What is the purpose of this? I noticed that there was one who was reclassified, then showed up in the resigned list as well. There were quite a few resignations. Are we doing exit interviews to see why they're leaving? Our responses are from Mr. Dodick. Mr. Dodick.
Good afternoon, school board.
Good afternoon.
So the first question regarding that employee, he didn't start his new assignment until September 20th, so that's why the reason for the correction. Regarding the reclasses, when a school...
Right, Dr. Dodick, you said he didn't start his assignment until when, please?
September 20th.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Regarding the reclassifications, when a school goes to Title I status, and these are for schools gaining Title I status in fiscal year 22, they're helping teachers and paraprofessionals, which are pay grade 4, are reclassified to pay grade 5 because of the Title I classification. So that's why you see them on the agenda. And regarding your final question, yes, we do exit interviews. It is an automated process where individuals are sent a link by the administrator for the school, or if it's a district administrator, by the district administrator, and it's incumbent for the individual to fill that out. It's voluntary. We don't require them to do it. So if the individual is leaving and they provide us that information, that administrator then gathers that information for the purposes of using it to retain employees. So yes, we do have a process.
Okay, so it's online, not person to person?
It's not person to person because a lot of times the people have already left, correct?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have one question. I wanted to look at the I'm sorry.
Well, is it on the?
It is not on the sheet.
Okay, well, let's get through this sheet.
Oh,
If
I'm
it's on
sorry.
this particular one.
Certainly, okay.
So you have something that's pertaining to human resources?
Yeah, mine was just on the exit interviews. Can we see any of the kind of trending data? Where are we on that? How far back can we, go back pre-COVID to now?
Sure. Ms. Halstead in my office is the person that goes through that data, and I would be happy to have her assist me in doing that and get that information to you all. Sure.
Just to kind of see what trends were, pre-COVID and then last year with COVID versus this year.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, ma'am. L6, approval to increase expenditures for ITN glass materials repair and installation. Question was, please explain this expense for one school that is a lot of money for glass. I'd like to see the scope of work for this particular item. It says here that I would have Ms. Cedeno, but looks like Dr. D is coming up here. All right, Dr. D.
And Ms. Giovanelli, that's yours.
All right, hey, yes, so this work for Spring Creek Elementary, you know, in the past, sometimes we would have done this with a general contractor instead of necessarily increasing the bid, but using this bid will save us somewhere between 12 to 18% on the cost, because of course the bid price is lower and it's such a large project. So the windows that they have now are original to the school, and they're faulty and they don't open, or when they are open, they need to be forcefully shut. The existing windows also have hinges that are no longer available. Thus, repairs to these hinges call for whole window modifications. The existing window glass is a plate glass with 1/4 of an inch thickness, and what we're replacing it with will be much thicker than that and hurricane grade. So the new windows will be hurricane impact glass and have a thickness of 5/16 of an inch. So, and there will also be include a low emissivity, I can never say that word, rating to help the classroom spaces cooler by keeping heat out of the spaces. So these types of upgrades that we're utilizing with the sales tax, we're trying to focus on things not only that the schools need, but that will also give us operational savings. So you would have seen before a lot of roof and window replacements. We're continuing to do that, and that's because it saves us on the other end on electricity costs as well when our buildings get more efficient. So it's a campus-wide project, and it includes the upgrades to the exterior doors and the window blinds as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
The last one I have here is for the public hearing section, approval to adopt policy 2.062, Parents' Bill of Rights. These questions were directed, I think, to our attorney, board attorney, general counsel, Ms. Dupuy-Bruno. And the questions were, parents' right to direct versus participate in education of the child may give impression the district does not have any authority. 3B, opt-out for sex ed already in board policy 3.071. 11C, who is in compliance, parent or board?
So with regards to 1A, which is the parents' rights to direct versus participate, that's statutory. So the statute itself specifically says to direct. So that's why we utilize that word. Regarding 3B, in terms of the opt-out for sex education, yes, it is in our board policy, but it is also in the parents' right as well, and a little bit more specific, so that's why it's included in that. It's part of all of those notifications that is in the parents' rights. And then 11C, which is another line that we added, it specifically is for parents. So because of the fact that parents have this new law, we are anticipating that they will also make sure that they are in compliance with any statutory requirements as well. So that's why it says parents versus the board.
Thank you.
Dr. Savage, that was
Those were all the questions that we added.
Okay. So now I'll go back to Ms. Fisher, because you said you had a question.
C2, can we know what the acknowledgements are for October?
What? Sorry, say that again, please?
C2, in the beginning of the meeting. Can we know what the acknowledgements are for October?
The four that I'm seeing published in the agenda are the only ones that I can see here in front of me. Disability History and Awareness Weeks.
Lunch.
School lunch, School Bus Safety Week, National Red Ribbon Week.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Is that it, Ms. Fisher?
Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Gittens, you said you had something that you needed to ask? You had a question?
No.
Oh, you didn't?
Don't look so surprised. I'm just teasing you. No, I'm fine, thank you.
Did anybody else have a question? Anything? Okay. That's good. So we are now to Miss Cindy, who's walking up here. Okay, so the next on the agenda is the prioritizing of the workshop topics with Ms. McClung.
Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Savage and Attorney Dupree Bruno. It's nice to be with you again this afternoon. So we have several items that have been added to the board workshop proposed list. So it took me a second to get here.
That list is as long as I am tall.
It does tend to grow, yes. All right. So I heard a mention of resolutions, and I have checked with a couple of different organizations. I've gone through many policies of different counties, and none of them have it in their policy. I did see that, I believe it's Miami-Dade, I'll have to go back and check my notes, but I believe it's Miami-Dade County. They have them before their regular agenda. So they are presented by board members before the agenda and voted on separately from the full agenda. But other than that, I was not able to find anything. I do have a couple of calls out, but have not received answers on those yet. So if you would like to discuss that at this time, we can have that discussion. If you prefer to put that off, it's up to the board's will.
Oh, goodness.
I'm behind.
Ladies.
Which one?
Ms. McClung, which one are we referring to?
To the resolutions which had been suspended until you had that discussion. I don't know if you want to have a full workshop on that, if you did, which did you prefer to do?
Ms. Gittens?
I do believe we have discussed this kind of at length previously, and I don't know that taking time to do a workshop is going to make any difference in the outcome. Did we ever, and Attorney Bruno, did we ever have a final actual action vote on how we were to handle resolutions and acknowledgements and all that? And the other part of that, I believe, don't you read the acknowledgements? Does the chair read the acknowledgements?
Just
I
the
mean, not the
resolution.
whole thing, but just the names that this month we are acknowledging such and such.
I don't think so. Just the resolutions are read. So I don't believe that you actually had an action vote. You had a lot of discussions.
Exactly.
And then when Ms. McClung was going through the protocol manual, you kind of parsed out how you were going to decide what was an acknowledgement, what was a resolution, and then you went through and picked out the resolutions for the year. So then you had another discussion because now the board was pulled it out of the consent agenda. I don't think it was ever in the consent agenda, but somehow the board started voting on the resolutions, and then you started having, different numbers in terms of who was voting for what. So that's what triggered the new conversation in terms of, do we want to continue with resolutions or not continue with resolutions? And then you suspended resolutions until you had that conversation.
Didn't we vote, though, on that we would only do certain ones that were nationally recognized, et cetera?
You did. You guys did have a workshop on that, and you took a consensus, and there's a whole list of the ones that you actually decided to move forward with.
So I guess I'm trying to figure, where did we go south from there,
Well, I'm going to say I asked about suspending this. I brought that up because of the fact that we were now voting on this, and we had members not voting and voting. So to me, I found that was worse, because the fact that now you have, it has the appearance of some of us not being for certain people. So that's why I had an issue with voting on resolutions, because of that fact, because I don't feel that we need to make sure that we're not offending anybody. So that's why I was like, we should not be, and if you go to the county commission, you go to any of their meetings, they do not vote on these things. You have, if Mr. Frank Mann wants to say something, or Brian, or whoever wants to bring something up, they bring it up. And it's theirs, they own it, it's theirs. It's not the whole, and it's not voted on, and you're never going to have anybody feeling that they're not, I don't know, valued, or I just don't think that we need that. So that's why I brought this up.
It isn't, okay.
Ms. Fisher and then Ms. Giovanelli.
Yeah, so in looking at that, at some of the other local governmental agencies, they do make reference and they do read resolutions, and some of them told me that they rotate that. But I don't know how we started voting on this, because we never did this before.
Correct.
And so it was that we were recognizing those resolutions for those groups in our community who live in our community. So I just didn't understand why we were voting on it, so I wanted to clarify that today. And I think that we have a list that we all agreed on, and so I don't understand what the big issue is.
Nellie?
If I remember correctly, before board docs, I don't think, and maybe y'all can correct me, maybe we didn't vote on it, but then when board docs came, it was automatic, and the whole, everything was voted at once, and then we'd only do the pools. And then I think Ms. Patrica asked to separate it out, and I understand. And so that's when it kind of changed. They were pulled out. I don't know, and we voted separately. Is it that the history I'm trying to remember? But my problem is, and it's something when we had the big long workshop about all the different ones. What's the point in a resolution if we're not taking an action? That was my whole problem with it from the very beginning, when we were picking and choosing and this and that. And I think picking and choosing is part of the problem. I prefer, and then you suspended it, which I thought was a great idea. And I would prefer that it not be something we vote on, and because I think that's not the point here. And I think that if we're not going to have some sort of action with a resolution, what's the point in having it? We can acknowledge anything we want, but what's the point in an actual resolution if we're not actually going to have something that relates to that happen at our meeting? And because that makes it significant to me, than just words on paper without action is really pointless. And that's all I can say. Thank you.
Ms. Fisher?
So historically and traditionally, we have had groups in the community send us resolutions, which our action was that we read the resolution and recognized the group, because they are an important part of the community. It was in the early part of the agenda, just like it is now, where it's under order of business is A, and then B, we have the pledge and the invocation. We don't vote on that. We have resolutions and acknowledgements, okay, and recognitions. So when someone wins state thespian or something, we recognize them. It's a tradition, it's historical, and it's our way of recognizing our community and the accomplishments of people in our community. So I don't know how we ever started voting on it, because it never was a vote before, but I would like to see us be able to accommodate the groups and read the resolutions, especially since we took the time to go over all of the potential ones, and we voted to do that. We made a list. Where's the list?
Oh, we have a list. But if you do look at the agenda, it is not part of the consent items.
Agenda.
Consent, thank you.
It is not. It is, Ms. Patrica?
So my name was brought up. Yes, I did ask for it to be voted on, because I am not comfortable acknowledging or resolving to do anything that's not associated with education as a member of this board. I believe that some of the categories that we agree to or don't agree to are political, and I'm not comfortable acting politically in my role in a nonpartisan seat. And Ms. Fisher, you did say we all agreed on them. I was a thumbs down on all of the subjects for resolutions when we had this discussion at the table. I think I had a 4 o'clock hard stop that day too, so I didn't get through the whole list. But the ones that are not directly related to education, like what we have today on, or for tomorrow night, for our acknowledgements, those are all education related. I had zero issue with that. But anything that can be misconstrued as political, I just don't feel like that's something we should be doing. So that's where I'm coming from on this.
Through the chair, may I respond to Ms. Patrica?
Yes, then we're good.
Okay, so can you remind me when you asked for that because you were concerned about it being political? Because you've been on this board quite a while, and it was never an issue before, so I'm just really confused about why this has become a big issue for discussion when it's been traditional and historical that we recognize those groups in the community who support us and who participate in education through their children and through the people who are our staff members.
So if I may.
So I don't.
And then Ms. Vaughn, please.
When, can you help me refresh my
I'm going to
recollection?
say it was in the spring sometime. So like
was this
April.
year.
It was this year, April
I
or
would say so.
May, something along those lines.
I mean, you know, may I, Madam Chair?
Yes.
The environment in our boardroom has become very politically charged. And so I think that as my awareness of that increased, my awareness of, you know, the board taking political sides on issues also increased, and my discomfort with it grew and increased. And that's why I am where I am right now.
Okay, and we have 7 board members, so I think that we need to probably then bring
that's
it
why I asked
to
to
the
vote.
table and vote on it.
Please,
Exactly what I asked
I'm
for.
going to ask Ms. Vaughn.
Okay, and I do agree with Ms. Fisher, because we took the time and went through every single one of them, and in my recollection, most of them are really important. We have National Women's Month, Black History, Hispanic, where I believe this went off the rails was the discussion of LGBTQ. That's when it supposedly became political. In my view, that's not political, that's just another community that we need to recognize. And the other thing is, I believe that as a board, 7 members, we spoke with the majority that were in favor of these recognitions. And, you know, if somebody is unhappy with it, that's the way it is on a board, that we speak as one group. And even if it were, I don't remember the vote, but even if it was 4-3, that's still the majority. And as far as I'm concerned, I would like to see us go back to having a minimum number, and ones that are, you know, I mean, it's not like we're going to, and, you know, no offense to, okay, my background is Italian, but from San Marino, you know, like, which is a republic. You know, we're not going to have National San Marino Recognition Month or anything like, you know, I mean, these are major topics that are addressed nationwide. And I think we should keep them as resolutions. I think we need to put them back. Obviously, we're going to have to take a vote on that, put it back so where it doesn't have to be voted on, because something that's going to be brought up in the meeting today is what's happened when we have something like National Hispanic Heritage Month and people vote against it, for better or for worse, how they are viewed in voting against that. And I think that's unfortunate. So.
Right, okay, and Ms. McClung, I'm not sure, I was trying to find that list that we had for that. Do you happen to, and this may be, we have to do this
Yes,
on another
I
day.
do have it. I can send it to you. Right now, I'm only logged into my Google Drive, and it's not on there. It's in my other files, but I can send that. I had brought it up because I'd thought I heard that you wanted to have discussion as to whether this would go on your meetings starting tomorrow. But it sounds like it may need to have a full discussion that may need to be postponed. So either that or the other option that I heard was that it does go back on the agendas, but not under the consent agenda items, so that it does not require a vote.
Well, it was never under the consent items, but even on here, so I don't even know how people perceived it to be a vote, but somehow it became that we were voting on that. And, but I'm thinking that if we, and Ms. Gittens, I'll get right to you, I'm sorry. And if this is okay with everybody, because I know we spent a lot of time going over those and making sure they were education, and the same thing that Ms. Giovanelli spoke about, being educational, and everybody had their, their comments regarding that list. So if she could send that to us and we bring that back at the next one, that way we could have that conversation, everybody can refresh on what all of those are. And if there are some that we do not want on there, then we bring it at that point and we speak about it and move forward. Is that, and Ms. Gittens?
Thank you. My suggestion, I look at the lists and the situations, and any way you slice it, there's going to be something that someone does not agree with. However, the constant that we all should agree with is the list of demographic, cultures, et cetera, of our students. If we were to be able to get from academic services a list, we have, this group, this group, this group, what do you check off on that form when you sign in? And that would be the only type of recognitions. I agree with you. Not recognitions, resolutions, because that who makes up our majority minority melting pot of a district. But all the other things, even the Women's Weekend, all of the other things, there's controversy in that, but there should be no controversy in the fact that we have this group of students, this group of students, this group of students, and just to recognize that. And the rest of it, just like you said with the county commission, if one of us is, really into breast cancer awareness, then we should bring it up during our own, because it's our thing. So I think that would kind of keep us out of the woods. It would be clean in that, no one would get offended that we have students going to our schools that are in this group and they weren't recognized. And it would take away all of the other guesswork, but it's just my suggestion.
Ms. Morgan?
So, Attorney Dupuy-Bruno, do we have a policy regarding resolutions, recognitions, whatever? Do we have a protocol that supports those?
You do. You had a huge discussion, and it's in your protocol manual, and it outlines how you're going to make those decisions and what are the criteria. So that's something in the new protocol manual.
Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're doing what's in policy, and we're doing what's in the protocol. Okay, so is somebody asking that we review the policy or the protocol?
Yes.
I'm asking that I not be held to a political vote of the board, and that if there is individual agreement on the board, that we be given the opportunity to vote on these things. That's, like Ms. Giovanelli said, any action of the board requires a vote. A resolution is an action by the board. That's why I asked for it to be separated out, because a resolution is action. We need to vote as a body, and I am absolutely going to get behind a 6-1 vote on this and do everything I'm supposed to do as a board member. But if we're acting, I should be given the opportunity to vote no.
So technically speaking, a resolution is considered more of a ministerial task. So we don't necessarily need to have a formal action vote on it. That's one pursuant to the Sunshine Rule, that we do not need a formal action vote.
Correct, but what will happen is then I wanted to speak about, I don't know, shoes, okay, perfect. But now we're gonna have one member that will say, well, I am not voting for that, I'm against that. So now the shoes are gonna be upset because we did not, as a whole, it still puts us in that same situation where we are putting ourselves out there where we are likely to offend somebody.
So,
and why do we want to keep doing that?
May I please make a statement there?
Yes, please.
Okay, so in my opinion, we are a group of 7 members. However, if one of us chooses not to participate in something, you're still 7 individuals. That's why we have the option to choose and decide what we want to do. It's not in a section where we need to vote. It is just some type of recognition of the fact that we, realize that you're out there. And like Ms. Fisher said, you're a part of the community and a part of our school district. Maybe we need to, one of the things is to lessen and make it shorter and not so formal and grandiose, but just, a simpler thing. But I still say that if one person on the board, then that's, upsets someone, that is on them, not on the rest of us.
So I'm not sure when this happened, but at some point, the resolutions did become part of the consent agenda.
Right.
I don't know when that happened, but at some point it did become part of the consent agenda, and the board was voting on it.
Right.
And then, so the process was the month prior to, let's say it's Hispanic Heritage Month, sometime in August, at the end of August, that would be on your agenda, you would vote on it, and then in September, the resolution would actually be read. So that was the process. I can't tell you how long that's been, but that was what was going on. And then Ms. Patrica came to the board and said, I'm not comfortable with voting on the resolution as part of the consent agenda, and she did ask all of the board members, this was at an open meeting, to pull it from the consent agenda so there could be a separate vote on that particular resolution for the reasons that she stated.
Because I didn't want to have to pull it every meeting. That was the point. The point was to have the smooth operation of meetings and just simply take a separate vote. I was going to vote no every time, but I didn't want, when you go through and say, are there any polls, I didn't want to have to pull it every meeting, and that was why I did what I did.
Right, but see, so that's why, that's exactly right, what you're saying. But so now we have a person who's always going to say no.
But
And then
that's
last
on
time,
her. I'm
I know,
sorry.
but last time we had 2. We had 2
Okay.
members, so what happens if we have 3 members or 4 members? So this just, we need to figure out a way that we're on this together, or we're not. Or we say it individually, because I just feel that there's going to be a problem with communities and people and feelings, and I just.
Ms. Jordan,
Yes.
if I might make a suggestion, the pre-organization meeting that will be November 1st, 9 a.m., and during that time, we normally review the protocol manual at that point. This is not in policy, but it is in protocol. So now that everyone has kind of heard where everyone stands, maybe it would be appropriate to postpone the rest of the discussion until that time.
Would everybody be okay with that?
Can I ask a question before you ask that consensus?
Yes, please.
Is there any appetite at all to consider the suggestion that I put on the table?
Which we could consider that at the reorg.
Yeah, let's do that.
And thank you for that, Ms. Gittens. So, Ms. McClung, I believe that would work. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take it up again then at the reorganization meeting, and I will be sending out the protocol manual in the next week or so that everyone has time to look through that. And if there are any other changes that you want to bring up, I'll be asking you to send me a note just letting me know that you want to review that at that time.
Could you also please send that list? I mean,
Absolutely.
we can all go back and try to locate that.
Just sent.
Oh, I don't look at my emails when I'm at a meeting, so thank you for doing that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so the rest of the items on here are simply a decision as to whether or not to put them on for a future workshop. The first request was from Ms. Patrica around assessor update. Ms. Patrica, did you want to discuss that any further?
I was that was before we received information from Dr. Savage about his trip to wherever, Fort Lauderdale or whatever, and we've received a lot of backup information regarding that, so I'm no longer in a position where I feel like I need an update on that.
Okay, so I'll put that as withdrawn. Thank you. And then I'm just going to have you do the next one as well, Ms. Patrica, which was policy 1.81.
So I know,
181.
or I've received some feedback that perhaps me raising your evaluation was taken as a criticism, when in fact it was a concern about our process or lack thereof surrounding an interim superintendent, because it is not in his contract. So I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention and make sure that we're on target from a timeline perspective to do the interim evaluation, halfway through the year at 6 months and at the 1 year mark. And I don't know what we as a board need to do in order to do that. But again, it's not in its contract, and that's usually where we find the evaluation piece.
Correct. Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, so that brings up again a question of policy. Should we be doing something in policy about the interim superintendent and evaluations? Because, well, I mean,
I guess if we plan on having a lot of interims, maybe? I don't know if.
It's happened before.
it happens, it can happen in an emergency situation.
That is true.
So you have to anticipate.
May I please make a statement there? I
Yes.
think we have said so many times over and over again that interim is not a job description. We have a superintendent, and whatever that superintendent does is within the purview of the job description for superintendent. If previously you had created a job description that says interim, that's a different story. So to me, it's very simple. 6 months in, or whatever that time comes up to, that's when he gets an evaluation. How are we going to say, oh no, this person's only going to be here for 4 months, so in 2 months we need to evaluate them? We can't do that. That whoever sits in the position, and we've had this over and over again, there is a job description for superintendent.
Okay, in saying that, I don't think anybody said 2 months, but in saying that, then you are, that seems about right. I mean, I'm kind of with you on, it would be whatever we use for a superintendent's evaluation is what we would use to evaluate any superintendent that's sitting in here.
Exactly.
It is not a job description issue, it is a contractual issue. This contract is silent on this issue. I'm simply bringing up, it is our job to evaluate and to provide oversight, and that contract is silent on this issue. That's really all this is.
Contract, okay. Ms.
Yes, and
Fisher?
the contract is specifically signed by Dr. Savage that he is an interim placement, a temporary placement. And, yeah.
Then we should have redone the job description.
It's not the job, Mr. Pre-Bruno.
Okay, so there is a board policy that does talk about evaluations. It's 1.16, and it does defer to the contract. So the recommendation that I would have for the board is that you have a 6-month evaluation and a 1-year evaluation, which is what has happened in all of the other superintendent contracts.
Great. And do we
Ms.
Do we
Pacheco?
need to amend the contract, or?
We can amend the contract and have Dr. Savage sign an amendment that just says an evaluation at 6 months and evaluation at 1 year.
Or we could have oral agreement, since it's,
I wouldn't.
okay.
No.
We'll do
It
an
can be
amendment to the
accomplished in less than a
contract
year,
to
so
include
oral would
that.
be fine,
I
but-
think a 6-month evaluation, a 1-year evaluation, as would be done with any other superintendent.
Are you good with that?
I don't know what's supposed to. I know, I'm trying to.
I'm going to go to Ms. Vaughn, please.
I'm going to say that I agree with Ms. Gittens and what Attorney Dupree-Bruno just said, regardless of the fact that Dr. Savage knows under the contract and the things that we laid out, interim, he should be evaluated the way any other superintendent is evaluated. And it's just not fair to evaluate somebody who just came in to a job and is working to maybe right some wrongs from earlier, you can only really evaluate a person, I would say it would take at least the 6 months. I think it's fair, and I think it goes along with what we have decided in policy.
Okay, and again, I haven't, no one is saying to evaluate him in 2 months. I think they're just having a conversation of what that looks like. It's not 2 months or 3 months.
Point of order, I'm not debating this, I'm giving my opinion.
Thank you. Ms. Giovanelli.
Since I'm the only one that hasn't spoke, yes, I actually agree with Ms. Gittens. I mean, the superintendent gets evaluated at 6 months and a year, and that's just what we should be doing, and that's that. If we need to amend the contract, if he's willing to do that, then that's fine, but honestly, he doesn't have to do it. So, but at that point, I mean, 6 months, so.
So, Ms. Morgan?
So I just go back to, shouldn't it be in policy?
It is.
Well, the policy says pursuant to the employment contract terms, so it doesn't have 6 months or a year in it. So if the board directs me to revise this policy to make it clear that it's 6 months to a year, we can do that. So that will have to go through the rulemaking process, obviously, so that's 28 days.
Okay.
We can do both. We can do an amendment and the rulemaking process.
So how did we operate on 6 months and a year with previous superintendents if it wasn't somewhere written?
In this contract, it was.
It's in the contract.
It was in his, it was in Dr.
Yeah, in their
Atkins'
contracts.
contract.
Yes.
Okay.
This was overlooked in the contract.
Okay. So could we have Mr. Bruno begin the restructure or amending that policy?
Yes, so if it's the board's directive, I will go ahead and revise board policy 1.16 to make it clear that it's 6 months and a year, and we'll do an addendum
For any superintendent?
for any superintendent.
And that we bring it up for vote tomorrow.
Yeah, and we
That
can,
action can
and
be
we
brought
can
up for
bring that-
vote tomorrow.
What action? The policy
change
cannot,
policy.
we can't bring the policy tomorrow. That requires, we have to go through the formal
No,
process.
I'm not saying bring the policy, I'm saying make the actionable item of giving you the direction to change, to put forth, to change the policy.
So that, to give me direction, the board can do that via consensus.
I'm calling you
Because it's not a
Ms. Vaughn.
formal action that you're taking. You're not doing a proposition or rule or proposal or anything like that. So
It's a policy change, though.
That'll come before the board. It will have to
policy
come back
itself
before
will
the
come
board.
before the board for the actual formal vote.
Correct.
That's the way
It'll
that
come
the
through.
process.
Ms. Vaughn?
I just want a point of clarification, Mrs. Dupree-Bruno. When you're saying an amendment, we will only be voting on that. We won't be taking the whole, I just want to make that perfectly clear, that we're not reevaluating a whole contract. We're just looking at that, right?
Yes, it would simply be an amendment that says that there will be a 6-month review and a 1-year review.
Now, I understood that, but I wanted it on the record said.
And we do have that on the record because we've instructed you to do that for any superintendent, so that is on the record as well. So thank you, Mr. Bruno. Is there any other comments?
So I just want to make sure that I do have consensus to move forward with both those things from the board.
Do we have consensus on that, please? Ms. Fisher, is there any reason why you will not vote for the amendment?
Policy 1.16 was updated in 2019, and there is no time certain in here regarding any evaluation. It does defer to the contract, the individual contract, and when we have hired superintendents in the past, they have had attorneys between our board attorney and the staff attorney and their attorneys, they have negotiated their contracts. So that could change, and, if we put a time certain in there, we may be limiting ourselves and maybe creating a roadblock where we don't need one.
And Ms. DePree-Bruno, if we make that change, then going forward, that would be a conversation regarding contracting and putting it into the contract of anyone else who were to come in, that we would have a 6 months and a year.
Yes, that would be an
Based on the
automatic.
policies update.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, the policy does require an interim assessment,
Right.
and then it requires a yearly evaluation.
Yes.
Right.
And we've done that, but it was in a contract versus in policy. So if it's in policy, then that's how we rewrite the contracts.
Yes.
Okay. So,
But the contracts are negotiated, so they may not agree with, I mean.
But you can't break policy in a contract.
okay, so Ms.
Well, if you're going to revise the policy and basically say from henceforth, any superintendent that we have, temporary or not, will have an evaluation if they hit the 6-month mark, and will have an evaluation when they hit the 1-year mark, that is going to be part of any contract. It's basically, this is the board's expectations, it's non-negotiable at that point, if you change the policy.
And I think that, me personally, I think that 6 months and a year is a good time frame. Is everybody in agreement of that? Dr. Savage,
I'm
did you
happy to
have
just,
something?
and not about my own perspective on it, but just to kind of reiterate what I think Ms. Fisher's alluding to on this, is that, I think it's pretty reasonable within the policy that we have to have some type of interim, interim assessment there. It's reasonable progress. So everyone knows how we're doing. I think the concern that I think any candidate might have is that, while we're looking at it from the board's perspective, if you're trying to consider it from the candidate or the superintendent's perspective, they may have an interest in the frequency of their piece, whether it's according to your policy or not. That's why it may be bargained within their contract. So while this specifically states that it's a piece of the contractual expectation, the contract reflects it. So I think the concern that the contract doesn't reflect it, then it would be expected as just kind of an amendment to the contract, that was negotiated by both sides in their interest. I think that's I'm just speaking for any candidate, not just for myself, but for anybody who would come, that's an interest to them. So they might say, knowing what the kind of situation they're walking into, considering the nature of how they might be evaluated, looking at maybe how prior evaluations were conducted for prior superintendents. Were they getting, really unfavorable reviews in kind of one segment, but then in the same categories getting horrifically different reviews? I mean, I think those are the kind of things that would certainly be on the mind of the council who's representing the candidate if they were in that type of negotiation. I think if you're looking at it purely objectively, everyone has an interest in clear expectations on all sides. And that's why evaluations are part of our routine experience for all staff here. Right. And I'm very much open to all those things. I would just say that's the thing that I'm kind of hearing as we kind of discuss those pieces and trying to give you what an applicant might be thinking from their standpoint and why they may have different opinions about that would be part of their negotiated interest. I don't know if that helps at all, or if that just muddies the water.
So where are we?
Just for full disclosure, I'm looking at the original interim contract for Dr. Atkins. It did not have an evaluation clause in it. So I don't know historically what has happened in terms of when you've had interims, if they have been evaluated or not. But I'm just looking at the documents that I have before me, and it was not included in that document.
Attorney DePree-Bruno, I believe it did, just because I assisted with preparing his documents for that. I believe there was a date of, and I can go back and find the exact document, but it was by the end of a certain month. I believe documents had to be turned in by March for the final evaluation, and I believe it was October or November for the interim.
I'm looking at the 2015, the original interim document that he had. I know that once he became permanent, that it wasn't.
I'm sorry, for the permanent's what I was assisting with.
Which was the interim contract that he had. So it's up to the board. Whatever the board's direction is, that's what I will follow.
Well, I think we've already had consensus, have we not?
We have had consensus. And Ms. Fisher?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Can we get you to live with it for further discussion when the policy is changed? Can we get you to go to thumb sideways, just so that we can move on and get the real consensus, and then,
Yes, the will of the board.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have that agree to add an amendment or to bring that forward in a policy change. The other one that Ms. Patrica had brought forward was policy 1.181, which I believe had to do with protective gear.
Yes, and I have to leave in just a few minutes, but, so the policy regarding protective gear, I'd like to see a change in the language so that any minor changes are communicated to the board, and any major changes are discussed with the board in non-emergency situations. That's the kind of a change that I would like to see to that policy. Because, let me go back. When we passed this policy, it was really important to give the superintendent the ability to act quickly when conditions are changing quickly and changes need to be made in an emergency type situation. But if we're in a situation where there's not an emergency, I think it's important for the entire leadership team to come together and have a discussion, understanding that the authority ultimately rests with the superintendent, but the board can always direct the superintendent to do something different in that discussion. Am I making sense? Does anybody have any questions?
Ms. Gittens?
Okay, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that the superintendent has the ability to make these decisions, but under certain circumstances, we can come in as the governance team and direct him to do something different. To me, that's just very confusing. I mean, either we're going, I guess it's simple enough to me that either you have the authority to do something, it's like the $50,000. If it's in there that he can spend up to $50,000 and he spends $49.99, then we can't come back and say, why did you spend $49.99? We have given in the policy and in the procedures to say that he can spend $50,000. I just feel like we're nitpicking each and everything, and this is an unusual time. We all know that with COVID and all that's gone on. But we can't go back, in my opinion, and keep changing our policies and what we do because of a situation that has happened globally. Those decisions were made, things were done in an unusual situation. We would be continually changing policy if every time something like this came up, we said, okay, well, now the next time we have to do that. I think we have the policy, we have the procedures in place, and it just, I don't know, it just seems to me that if some board members don't like the way this is going on, we're always back here where they want to change. We can't continue to do that. We have to abide by what we said we would do. We discussed it, we passed it. Here's the rules. Can't we follow our rules that we made?
And that was, if I may, part of the discussion when we passed the policy. The discussion was that the expectation was that changes would be communicated to the board, but major changes would be briefed to the board, and that didn't occur. So it's essential that specific language, as we get new leadership and new boards changing and superintendents changing, it's important that those expectations that were discussed at the table be part of the policy. That's the first thing. The second thing is, this is a brand new policy. This is a brand new time.
And may I just say, that was your interpretation that you were not informed.
I was speaking. As we live with a policy in a brand new situation like a pandemic, I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize some potential weaknesses and clarify that. I mean, I had a discussion with Dr. Savage, if I may. Do you mind?
Not at all.
I had a discussion where I said, please call a special meeting, and the policy didn't require that. Had the policy required that, we would have come together as a governance team and had that discussion. So it's just a matter of clarifying expectations in writing.
May I please finish and respond, and I'll be quick.
It's Ms. Morgan, and then Ms. Vaughn, and then Ms. Fisher.
Okay. The point is, and when you talk about calling a special meeting, I have at least 5 emails where I have called for special meetings and they have gone for naught. They have not been recognized, they have not been responded to. It has nothing to do with the policy or a contract. So I just still say we can't change the steps every time something is not exact. We can discuss it. We can have, and say, well, how are you doing this, and voice our opinions or whatever, but I just don't think we need to keep changing policies.
Okay, I'm sorry. I've got a hard stop.
Madam Chair, before Ms. Patrica leaves, could we get consensus on whether or not to take this to workshop?
Well, I know we still have other people that are speaking on it, on this.
Are they discussing whether or not to go to workshop, or are they discussing to change?
We're discussing the topic.
Whether or not to take it to,
Ms. Morgan.
Okay, so my comment is this. Generally, we review policies on a periodic basis every 3 years. So we have regularly an opportunity to revise policy. But in this case, it was a new policy. It was written for a specific situation. We have now had experience in that specific situation. I think we need to go back and look at the policy and make certain that it is what we expect should these things occur again. I don't think this is asking for, we're updating every single policy. I think it's saying that this was an extraordinary policy at an extraordinary time. We may have to use it again. Let's use our experience from the first time to look at the policy and see if we want to change it for any incidents going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Ms. Vaughn?
Yeah, I don't think it hurts to workshop this, but I want to underscore the word emergency. That means that during an emergency, like when the Twin Towers was hit by the plane, nobody's going, oh wait, let's call the mayor. And no, emergency is emergency, and whoever is where the buck stops, that person has that that power. We gave that power to Dr. Atkins. Now, regarding special meeting, I called for a special meeting. I want to remind everybody, Ms. Patrica voted no. So if you wanted a special meeting, you should have said yes. And I think Ms. Morgan voted no, and 2 people did, all right? So I went round and round on that, trying to get a special meeting called, because I felt obviously the same way some people. I wanted something a little bit different, but maybe what we need to take a look at, if we're looking at this, is how we react to special meeting. I know we have a protocol, we have, it's in policy, and yet I was extremely unhappy, so let's just add that as well on a special meeting.
So on this topic that we're on right now, policy 1.181.
Maybe it could be put in there or somewhere else.
Revisiting, Ms. Fisher, before I ask about us putting this back on to revisit it.
Thank you. So I just wanted to bring something to light. Policy 1.81 is specifically about emergency protective gear, e.g. mask, hazard suit, or whatever. Policy 1.18, the mother policy, which is about emergencies and was last revised in 2015, clearly says in any kind of an emergency, the superintendent has the right to suspend any of the other policies. The board shall be immediately notified of such action. If there is a need to continue policy suspension or change, the superintendent shall bring a recommendation forward to the board at the next scheduled meeting. As a governance team, we need to be informed. That's my big point. So I think that, yes, we should take another look at this, because these two really go together.
Okay,
No, but 1.181 is specifically about emergency gear. It's not about emergencies in general, which 1.18 is.
So-
And it might need to be updated because it's been
1.18.
several years.
1.18, correct? Okay, so can I get a consensus for us to revisit 1.18 and 1.181?
May I ask one quick question, please? Please? In 2020, when Dr. Atkins took the emergency control, and I believe, I remember the conversations with Mr. Quick and others about what that meant and what that looked like. And we had those discussions, so I'm not sure why we're looking at doing that again.
Okay, this is just to revisit. It's not to say Dr. Savage did anything wrong or anything like that. It's just to say, we've already experienced this twice now. And hopefully, we never again have to use it. So if we can bring this back and revisit it together, the 1.18 and 1.181, thank you. That way we can have opportunity to look at it. Is there something we need to tweak in it? We're collectively, including Dr. Savage, we're having this conversation and we move forward. Do we have consensus in doing that? Bringing it back to revisit. Thank you.
Before I go, Attorney Tabri Bruno has been trying to say something to me.
I would like to have a little bit more discussion on the amendment to the contract. And the reason is, I looked at another contract from 2010 with Lawrence Tilham, am I pronouncing it right? Tian, who was also a interim superintendent. So that clause was not in there. So I'd like to flush that out just a little bit more with the board to make sure that we're all on the same page, and then we can take another consensus if the board is in agreement to do that, just because I just noticed that from that contract.
So can you just reference the policy in the contract?
I can. I mean,
because that really clears it up, right?
It doesn't give you a date, because
yeah,
it still
but-
says employment contract.
1 year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just
I
want to
can
make
go with
sure,
that.
because after looking at those two prior contracts, I think I now understand what the prior attorney was trying to accomplish with not having it in there. I think I understand that. So I know you have to go, and I know this is something that you were concerned about, so if we can talk a little bit about it tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Sorry, you got it down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next item is executive pay scale, and that was brought up by Ms. Jordan.
And I know that we've had conversation about it, but I also believe that we have that scheduled to come up, right?
Yeah, we
For
have.
conversation?
Yeah, we actually have I mean, it just depends on what the full gamut of what you'd like to discuss. We have a process right now going through procurement area to take a look at the entire organization, but I think what I want to make sure I'm clear on is this just relative to the memo, the executive pay memo that I sent, or is it relative to the pay scale in general and opening up all those procedures? Because I just want to clarify again, the memo that I sent was strictly so that I could start issuing payment to people who were already hired to cover kind of a gap in our established process that we could not locate any document to guide us through our existing process. So we followed our existing process. The only difference was there's just a slight gap that is pretty important because we didn't have any way to resolve that gap, hence the memo. But in terms of revising our entire executive pay and all that, there was no intention of going into that right now. That's why we were attempting to hire a third-party expert to do all that evaluation, because I was just honoring the 2018 study that we had already done here. Just use that information in our currently adopted administrative pay. That's what I used. The only difference was I couldn't take the matrix that we had and then take that and issue out a salary number, because there's just a little bit of a gap between this and this. And because we could not resolve that gap, but I had people already working, I had to be able to pay them. And I had to do it in a way that wasn't creating a liability for us. That was the concern, that there was just a gap in that process. That it's an existing piece, but I didn't invent a new one. It was strictly to take the logic of what we had in front of us so that it was memorializing publicly and really for our whole organization until we get clarity of what this missing piece is, or until we get a third party to come in and do, you know, the full analysis, this is just so that people can be paid. The alternative was I'd have to pick a number, and I did not feel comfortable picking a number. That was not something I felt that I was, certainly I could, but I didn't feel that that was appropriate to do that. And so based on analyzing the ones that had already been done, how people had been paid, we could not derive, in my mind, a defensible mechanism. And so that's why I issued the memo strictly to clarify, here's what happened. But in terms of revising full executive, I mean, we're very interested in compensation in general in our organization. I think that's powerful, and we are engaging in a procurement process currently to try to obtain that, so that we're looking at the whole organization, because, you know, pay is obviously very important to the organization as well. So,
All right, Ms. Morgan?
Yeah, so I think you all got my memo. Just talking about the fact that, you know, we're sitting on a draft of recommendations to change policy. It's clear that in the administrative salary schedule process, there may be some lack of clarity that needs to be resolved. You know, my feeling, particularly given a new superintendent coming in, I think it's important that we workshop those policies and that we workshop the administrative procedures. And so I've laid out for you what I would like to do. I'd like to see the board agree to do that, or do something similar to that, because I think we need to do it.
Thank you. Ms. Gittens?
I would like to see the third-party evaluation of the process. In my opinion, I'm just speaking for me, since 2018, when I joined the board and the executive salaries and all were done, I never received the information that I had asked for that explained what was going on. Yes, there were, I got your email about that, and there were some lists, but when I sat in the room with the superintendent and the head of HR, the documentation they were using, I asked for a copy, and I was told it's being worked on, we'll get it to you later. I never received that. So to just make it clean and a clean slate, to have someone like, you know, if we had RSM, we could ask them to do it, or maybe they would be willing to do it as a contractual job, but just to look at what is this process, where are the holes, what needs to be filled in, not pointing fingers at anyone, but just plugging up the holes or the missing pieces, and give us some type of idea how to move forward. I agree with you at having the workshop, but I think prior to having the workshop, we should know, what are we workshopping? What do we have to work with here? So if we could do a consensus to have a third party look at it, we get all of that information together, then we meet and look at that and make the decision. I just think that that would be easier.
Well, I don't believe that, we don't need to make a consensus for him to do this. This is something that,
I'd be happy to bring it for, I mean, honestly, for us, it's so much to unpack, and I spent probably about 3 weeks myself going through the full executive history piece of it, just to make sure that there wasn't anything I was missing. But I really would like an expert in this particular area, because it's so important. And honestly, I do think that it's perfect timing, because as you bring on another superintendent in that permanent capacity, they're going to have an interest. And if you've engaged an expert service in that, and they're not looking at just the executives, they're looking at the broader range. And you know, we're in a changing market condition, so even 2018, it's just, compensation is always a hot button issue. It's a particular passion area for me. I just think it's great body of work to engage in. I think we start that body of work. The only reason I wanted the third party at the outset is just to clarify some misconceptions, because I think that's the part that I had. I actually just needed to be able to pay people who are already hired. I could not do that justifiably, because there was a slight gap. It's not that the whole thing was, there was a lot of great logic in a lot of the pieces and steps. The problem was there's just one slight gap in the process. And then the more I dug on it, the more there was ancillary damage from that. You know, there's people who were then paid less and then when I were trying to find out what, I'd love the time for us to go through it and look at it and unpack that all. I think it's a great suggestion.
Well, so if
I'd be happy to bring
you
it.
were to do that, and then what I had spoke about could be moved down with what Ms. Morgan, because it kind of like goes together, the pay scales, the policy, and then that way once we have Dr. Savage does that, then we can come back and look at, are we doing it the right way, and where is that missing piece of paper, the metric, or this, where is that at, to pull them all together?
Madam Chair, may
Yes.
I ask you to call for consensus to direct the superintendent to move forward on getting a third party to look at the situation and get information back to us?
Do I have consensus in doing that, and you already want to do that?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you, we have consensus. So then, if you would combine those?
And then do we have consensus for the further workshop?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bruno?
Can we also combine then the board policies 5.05 and 5.30, because that goes along with the same?
Yeah, that's what we're saying, pull those together.
Yeah.
And Mr. Giovanelli?
And just real quick, I'd like to add, I'd like to know where the market rate information comes from. That was one of the questions I'd asked, so that'll
what
come
you
with
will
that.
find
Yeah,
out.
we'll
That's
look
all.
at it.
Correct.
Thank you.
It's pretty, I mean, it's in there. It would just, there's just a lot to unpack there, and
Okay.
you could spend a lot of time going through it.
Well, I'd rather be briefed on it.
Just a point of clarification, so we just merged in the 5.05 and 5.30. Those were specific considerations relative to the policies of how appointments are made, finding on our manual. So with your permission, what I'd love to do is, that is probably a multi-part thing, but we would bring together, here's our current process of how we advertise, hire, so forth, all those pieces. Here's the exemptions. What do you think about those kind of things? I think the compensation side truly is a distinct body of work itself, even though they are related. But with your permission, this would probably be a multi-workshop topic, if you'd be okay with that.
Because I just think it's really important that, that everybody sees that it's not that we're taking care of the top down. We are concerned about everybody, and we need to make sure that everybody's compensated.
Yep.
So thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Ms. McClung?
Yes, I just want to clarify, so that one will be separated out then based upon the superintendent's request, correct? The executive pay or the pay in general would be a separate workshop?
It'll all go with the board policy and the appointment, reassignment, personnel, promotions, reclass, all of that as one group.
It's going to be a pretty ambitious segment, is what I'm trying to say. You could literally spend probably 2 hours just on the compensation, on just re-going over the executive salary. So I mean, I see the linkage. I just want to make sure that we're, so if you, I mean, are you see what I'm following there?
We have part one, which is where we are and what we need to do to correct it, and then part two would be the revision of the policies. Also looking at some of the other policies that Ms. Morgan provided from Miami-Dade and some others, and getting best practice and revising.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay, the next item was from Ms. Giovanelli around parents' rights bill awareness.
Ms. Giovanelli?
I just thought we need to have be briefed on that or workshop it, or say just for the community awareness, really is.
I'm not sure what is it that you're wanting. I know we had the policy, which will be coming up again for public hearing.
We had the policy, I think, at our first reading, and we also showed the website that goes along, and the website is actually live now.
Okay, I think that's it. That's fine. Then we don't have to do it. I mean.
Okay, so I'll mark that one as withdrawn. And then the last one was also Ms. Giovanelli around Early Childhood Center and LAMP.
Oh, yeah.
Ms. G, what do you?
Just updated on that. I mean, that's just that's something that the superintendent needs. I gave him some information on that, so.
We have someone actually look into this, so I met with Dr. Spiro, and he's, we're working on this.
Yeah, so I mean, that can wait until the staff works on that and more and analyzes that.
If you're willing to give us some time just so that we can get more of the information,
absolutely.
I'll be happy to provide the board, even in a one-to-one update, just so
Okay.
you have a sense of that as well for the whole board.
Okay, so this is just an update. We're waiting on an update on that one, Ms. McClung.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
That would be a yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, and that was all of the items. Does anyone have any additional items that they would like to bring forward for the parking lot to be considered as a workshop?
Ms. Morgan?
Yes, the Lighthouse recommendations and Lee Management Group, that's the one that we got information about having them observe us. And, you know, I want to say, I'm going to take a moment because I haven't talked a lot today, that it's a great idea, but fact of the matter, sorry. It's a great idea, but the problem is that we sit so far apart that to get all of us on camera is impossible to watch us. We're all wearing masks. You can't see facial expressions. So my thought was maybe we take a look at sort of the thing that they laid out and see if we can't write a RFQ to do the same thing, but with somebody local who can actually come, attend the board meetings, watch individual board members, and then do the same sort of counseling. So I'm suggesting that we back off from somebody trying to do it online and try to find somebody who can do the same work locally where they're actually able to see us, which is how it was done by this group in Texas when they worked with those school boards.
Yes.
So you're saying then we have someone come in and video, but the organization that we're looking at still does all of the evaluation?
No.
You're saying somebody entirely different?
Yeah, I'm just saying use the model that firm provided and see if we can't do it with somebody local.
But is that, well, I don't know. I think we'd have to look at, what's the word for it, copyrights or whatever, if we're doing that type of thing.
I don't know if we have looked at anyone local. I know that there was an attempt to find somebody, but I don't know if we found anybody local. I think that whoever manages and gives advice and counseling to boards will have their process that they use that they feel have been successful. So if the question is, should we look at somebody else local or a little bit closer, because I do understand what Ms. Morgan is saying. It's hard to really understand the body language is more than half of communication. So if they're not able to see the facial expressions and stuff like that, it may be difficult for them to give advice.
So maybe perhaps we should ask the people that we're looking at and see, because they obviously haven't stopped doing what they do during the COVID. So maybe ask them, is there something that they can add as to how we can do it?
And I will say, because I was directed by, it was consensus that we go forward with this, so I did, reach out to him.
Right.
And he did send us the invoice, which I sent everybody, the invoice and everything. And he was willing to start at not tomorrow, but at the following meeting. So I would need to know what your pleasure is so I can contact him to say, no, we do not want.
But what I'm saying is, can't you ask him, are there other...
My microphone's right here. It's right here.
Okay.
We're even getting texts.
Can't you contact him to find out if there is any other procedure based on, and I agree, it's difficult to see facial expressions and all that, so perhaps asking him that information, how do you work it with that, because the board is a little, on the fence based on what she has said, and get a response from him.
Okay, I will definitely send him an email and ask him how he is working that at this time with the masks and everything. And then I will send that forward. Is there any other things I should be asking him?
The problem that I see is that when we video the meeting, the problem that I see when we video the meetings is the camera focuses on the speaker. The camera doesn't see how other people at the board table are reacting. And so it's a wide screen, and if you're looking at everybody on a wide screen because we're socially distanced, it's almost impossible to get a sense of who's doing what. So
But he may have things to,
he may, very well, and that's fine, but that was the point, those 2 points were the points I was trying to make.
Okay, so I certainly will reach out to him today. I know he's traveling, so we'll get the respond back by Wednesday, and then I will shoot that out to everybody, what his response is for that, and then we can let me know how we will move forward. And as far as the lighthouse, that definitely was a recommendation that came through Ms. Thomas and Mr. Quick regarding how that is used, and they felt that we really should be revisiting that one as well, so that way we are making sure that we are using it in the proper manner. And also with the lighthouse investigation, the recommendation as far as contacting the affected parties that was done by Mr. Quick for those who he had names for. If it was anonymous, of course, he had no one to follow up with, but he is the person who took care of that. So that has all been done. And so, yes, they did recommend on their last and final that we look at the how we are using this and come up with our procedure on what we really feel that it should be. And I want to thank Ms. Morgan for putting this table together with all the investigations. She consolidated all of these and sent them to us. So I just really appreciate you doing that as well. And the lead management group, I think that's, Lee, L-E-E.
sorry.
So, excuse me, Madam Chair, so what is the will of the board in terms of moving forward with the recommendations regarding Lighthouse? I know that Mr. Quick advised, the parties. I do believe that there is one that either professional standards or I have to advise the party. And then the other recommendations, what are we going to do? Because Lighthouse, this is something that needs to be resolved. We need to understand how to handle these cases. We need to move forward with how we're going to handle the whistleblower cases. I mean, all of this does need to be resolved. And again, my recommendation is prior to your audit committee, so they know the direction of the board, of how the board wants to move forward with this. So I would recommend that this be workshopped in detail.
ASAP.
Yes.
I agree.
Agreed.
Ms. Vaughn?
Yeah, and I was going to say the same thing, because I'm not sure if I copied the whole board, but I know I did write to email Mr. Bruno and said that we definitely need a debriefing, and it might have been at the same time that I requested the invoice, which we haven't received yet, and I don't know how long that's going to take, but you can't put a price on honesty and integrity, but on the other hand, we had a lot of stuff, nothing was substantiated. As I recall, the original, the format, I don't know quite the right word to use, that was brought forward by Mrs. Dupree-Bruno on how everything would work got changed, didn't it? And I never quite understood why it was changed, and I have been very unhappy with the whole, we get things that are anonymous and hearsay, and yet we've spent a lot of money having a big investigation on it. We definitely need investigations on some things, but the idea of an investigation is not a gotcha. The investigation is, here's a big problem, we need to take a look at it, and I think we also need to take another look in conjunction with that, with the whole idea of whistleblower. What is a whistleblower? Who is a whistleblower? Because we have had district employees that have claimed whistleblower status and yet have been retaliated against and it wasn't accepted. And then we've had high-ranking district administrators that claim whistleblower, and that was embraced. There's something wrong with that whole situation.
And I agree with you, Ms. Vaughn, on the whistleblower. So, Ms. Dupree-Bruno, because I know that there is statute clearly stated for what a whistleblower is, whether it is as far as an employee. So maybe at the same time when we're going over the information for Lighthouse and how we think that needs to be going, whistleblower, you could bring us back the statutes on that and share, give us an update on exactly what, because it's clear what a whistleblower is.
Right.
So if you would do that, that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay.
And just so you know as well, I think this will be coming before the board, but now there's a budget that's going to be added to the board attorney's office for investigations because we've had some and we have to make sure that we pay for them. So there's going to be a line item for that.
Okay.
The board is aware.
Perfect, thank you. And is that,
So there is a consensus to go forward with that? I heard it, I didn't see one, but it sounded as though there were a consensus.
we'll make sure that it gets on.
Thank you.
We'll be happy to
It'll get on.
work together. And just to give ample time to make sure it's mapped out, that's a very important area to map out.
Okay, is there any other items that we want to add to this at this time?
You were on Lee Management Group.
Lee Management, we discussed that. I'm going to send him an email.
Oh, okay.
And
all right.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I have that. That's done. So I think that's it at this time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. I'm sorry, maybe not.
Oh, back to the auditor, though. Are we going to not do an auditor until we get the audit committee? That's where we're at with that?
Okay, so if I can give you, thank you, Ms. McClung. I'll give so the update is RSM, I had sent you out about what RSM had stated. So RSM at this time will not participate with us until we have an audit committee, which if all of you will make sure that you let Ms. Reeder know that everything is good. She sent that out, and so she just needs to know that it's good so we can, move forward and get that out and advertise. We're going to put it out for 2 weeks so we can expedite that because everybody's, wants to get it moving, and we'll get them, get their names back in and get them on. So at that time, as RSM recommended, and speaking to a lot of other auditors in the area, they were also stating that that would not be a bad idea to have our own personal in-house auditor, and then they can outsource what our needs are for investigations and everything, exactly how I expressed that to you all. So, but we can't do that until we get the audit committee, so that way they can help us with that, and then we need to come up with the job description and then have that posted as well, if that's how we are looking at going forward, which will be a board decision on that. Okay. So the audit committee is very, we have to make sure that that happens.
Yes.
So 2 weeks, as soon as she has everything, it's going out, advertised, and it'll be done in 2 weeks. Okay. And I think that's it. So we are actually at the good of the order, and I am going to say, and I know everybody's not here, but I think what we really need to discuss is, and maybe that could go on this, we need to figure out, do we have a protocol for using the district logo? And at what, when are we permitted to use that? And so that there's no discrepancy if we're speaking on our own or if we're speaking on behalf of the district. So I think that's something that we really need to, and the guidelines for doing that or using that. Because I know we just really need to be careful of when we are out there and we're speaking to people, and we're speaking for us as individual, that we are making sure that we are speaking on us, or me.
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, may I recommend that that also be part of the reorganization meeting, because you're going to be reviewing your protocol manual, so maybe that could be a discussion as to, for the board members?
Ms. Vaughn.
Okay, well.
Ms. Vaun, good of the order.
Pardon me?
Good of the order, Ms. Vaughn.
I have a good of the order. I thought you were going to bring up something slightly different, but I will bring up my good of the order. I sent a message to the board on Thursday, September 30th at 10:25 p.m. and Mrs. Jordan responded. This is to inform you I've received the email from Ms. Vaughn of, well, she probably got it Friday morning, that had gone out to all of us. I will be bringing this matter up for good of the order at our Monday workshop conversation.
And
that
may I
wasn't,
explain the reason everyone's not here to have this
I'm
conversation?
going to bring it up anyway.
That's fine. That's why I did not bring it up, though.
All right, I'm going to read what I wrote. Again, September 30th. Good evening. And I sent this to all the board members, by the way, and Dr. Savage. In light of widespread news media and social media coverage of board member Chris Patrica's public comments at the Estero Council of Community Leaders, disparaging our Guatemalan student community, I am requesting that our governance team respond ASAP with a memorandum that makes it clear that her xenophobic remarks do not represent the convictions of the school district of Lee County. Although Mrs. Patrica asserts that she was speaking as an individual, the fact that the logo of our district was her backdrop definitively connects her to Lee schools. We must make it clear to the community that we celebrate the diversity that has made our country great. So my ask in this is that we draft a memo or a statement, I don't know the exact word, that we would use. Mrs. Dupree-Bruno did get back to me, and I think actually we had a moment to chat, and she suggested that this could not be done. Again, this was last Thursday that I sent this, excuse me, that it might be construed as a violation of sunshine. And so that's why, despite the fact that we've had 2 people already leave, I want to bring it up right now. And I've put my own personal, I did that to the board the day before. That was my personal feeling. And then once this started hitting the news media on TV and social media and news press and all of that, I thought it had gotten to the point that as a school district, or at least as a board, we need to make a statement distancing ourselves from those xenophobic comments. I was very, very careful in what I wrote. I actually responded to a couple constituents that wrote directly to me, and I gave my opinion on this, but I was very careful to say I'm one member of this board, and while it was appalling to me, mostly, you know, everybody has the right to their own individual statements, but what put it over the top for me is the fact that that very specific symbol of this district was the backdrop. And we even had a letter from FSBA since Mrs. Patrica is also the president of the state organization. Now, the state organization took the view that she was speaking as an individual. Well, that's up to them. But me, personally, as a board member, I would like to see us put out a statement distancing ourselves from that. And if we don't decide to do that as a board, I've yet to put anything out wider, but I certainly will do this. I will do it for the third time because I don't want to be associated with the idea that that is something that we are saying officially as Lee County School District.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Anybody else comments? Ms. Gittens?
Well, even though it's a late hour, I just wanted to say when, and I'm sure you are all aware that I do a digital event every Thursday evening, and I make sure at the beginning to, and after discussing it with our attorney, and who gave me input and saying, make sure to do, you know, you do this and you don't do that. So I did clear it with her, and at the beginning I always say, if I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not the board, and that if any of you are listening in, to please not do so until after it has been posted, not during the live segment. So I make sure to do that. I was asked by the news right after this happened for a statement, and my statement was basically that I can't judge the intent of any individual other than myself. I don't know what people think and what their intent might have been, but I did say that it troubled me to think that we are a majority-minority district and we don't have the sensitivity to understand all the different cultures and how to deal with cultures in our district. So, I mean, I thought as well, do we need to put something out? And I'm not sure. I would leave it to the attorney. I think we each individually can say whatever we want as adults, that, you know, we agree or disagree, and I definitely disagreed with the whole situation. And actually, I was a little bit concerned about the whole, I watched all 30-some minutes, and I was very concerned of the detail of the presentation about, you know, building and construction and all of that. And I thought it was really overstepping bounds, and she even mentioned that she had been trained or schooled about it from staff, that she had met with staff. We, several months ago, it was decided that Ms. Patrica would be the liaison to the ECCL. And as the liaison, I think if we're going to talk about protocols and what we do, we need to look at what does that mean. Why not have, if you have a presentation that an engineer gave to the zoning, why wouldn't you have staff present that and you're there, you know, for support? But that to me is a real issue, especially when a school was practically, all of the groundwork was laid and the walls were ready to go up at a school 10 minutes from my house, and I knew nothing about it. It was named, it was starting to build and all of that. So where is the equity for the rest of us if that's the type of detail we're all going to have in our districts? Then it should be equitably done, and I should know the same information to be able to share it. So we need to come up with some.
Madam Chair, may I ask that we stick on the subject of my ask on this, please?
Well, what I was saying is I agree with you that we should have some type of, you know, discussion about the protocol.
Okay, I'm going to make an announcement right now, and everybody can continue to discuss. But this serves as my announcement, and I'll send it in a little bit as an email. I will make a motion tomorrow night on this, that we, and y'all can vote on it then, and I will make that motion, and it's going to be that we as a board, governance board, distance ourselves from it and reiterate, make it clear to the community that we celebrate the diversity that makes this country great. And I understand that we're going to have quite a few people coming to the board meeting tomorrow. I understand there's going to be a protest, and so there, in addition, are likely to be many people weighing in. And so at the very least, this will be my motion. I may go farther in my motion. We'll see what
Ms.
the
Vaughn,
community feels.
if I may, the reason nothing was written and sent out was because we did not have a conversation. So per.
Okay, no, I said that.
Per the board attorney, but you're making a statement without hearing from everybody else at this table. So I immediately had conversations with our school board attorney as well as Dr. Savage. We had multiple conversations. But because of the fact that we as a governance team had not had a conversation on what should go out, what statements should be made, that's why we did not have anything go out.
If I may?
Yes.
If I may, I'm just making an announcement that I will bring it up as a motion, especially considering we're missing 2 people, including Mrs. Patrica, and I'm happy for all of you to discuss it right now, but after I make my motion, there will be also discussion time, and we will be at that point privy to the feelings of the community as well. So there.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Ms. Morgan?
I would just respectfully ask that you provide the motion now for our protocol in writing. What is the motion you are going to ask us to vote on?
That's what I said, Ms. Morgan. As soon as I'm done here, I will send you in an email, so everybody has it.
Thank you, Ms. Vaughn. Ms. Giovanelli?
I would love to talk, but I am late for an appointment, and I was kindly trying, you know, I would like to discuss this, but I have a lot of questions for the superintendent. But I agree that, you know, the things that were said were clearly not of this board, and I've made a statement on my own personal Facebook to that, and I'll stand with that. But, I mean, she was privy to some information that has not been presented here from what I listened to, and so I would ask for that information. I would ask for, I don't have the seal, I don't own the digital seal from anything that I would do outside of the district, and I would never. So I think we have to discuss, you know, what is our lane and how do we stay in it, and that has to be, you know, I'm one of 7, and we're a board, and so I have a real big problem with the whole conversation that took place that at that, I too watched it, had a hard time finding it, but it took me a couple days. So, but I mean, my question is, you know, how did she have that information? Where did she get the seal? Who prepped her? Was that more than 1.5 hours? I mean, these are all things that could be against our protocols, and yet, you know, she constantly, and we get reprimanded, actually many of us, when Ms. Gittens tried to do a book club, she was reprimanded, and she was just doing a simple book club. So I mean, and was accused of doing things outside the district. So I think we have to talk. This has to be a more of a conversation without. That would be the other issue I have, is I don't believe in doing anything without everybody being present, because we are a board of 7. So, and I respect that completely. So, I mean, you know, there's just a lot that there's, you know, questions for the superintendent. Like I said, the 1.5 hours, she obviously knew quite a bit, so she had to be prepped. There's no way that she just got that from the PowerPoint that was handed to her. You know, who gave her the PowerPoint? I'm assuming she didn't do the PowerPoint. If she did, then staff did, and was that was it asked by her to the staff, or that was presented, maybe the staff presented that and they gave it to her later. I don't know who gave it to her. That's the questions I have. And whose authority gave it to her? I mean, the superintendent's? I don't know, you know.
Understand any of those
Okay,
questions.
well-
I'd have to make.
Okay, well,
sure
that's why this needs to be another conversation.
Right.
And I apologize, but I do have to go.
No, and that's why I was waiting, I wanted to bring it up with everyone, because we do need to figure out what is that protocol? Who is,
This needs
how
to
is-
be
how is
a
the
workshop.
backdrop being
Where'd she
allowed?
go?
As well as what is our role as a liaison? What does that actually mean? And how far do we go with that? So I just think we need clarity on all of that. And of course, I personally do not agree with some of the comments that were made there as well. And yes, we are about diversity and inclusion in this district. That's me as an individual, because heck, my kids I have a mixed bag of family. So yes, I'm very thoughtful and considerate when I'm speaking. But I think this is a conversation that we have to have with everybody before we can make any kind of statement, letter, memoranda, or whatever that looks like. And we have had that conversation the last couple days. So it's not that we're not thinking about what is taking place, but we need to include everybody in this topic.
Absolutely. I mean, as a board, we represent all students, and all means all in Lee County, so.
So does anybody else have anything for good of the order? Ms. Gittens, do you have anything?
I love when you look at me and hold your
Sorry,
breath.
I have to go.
No, I don't. No, I will save mine till tomorrow. I thank everyone for the time and discussing all the things that we have.
Ms. Morgan, did you have anything for good of the order? Mr. Preber, no?
No, thank you.
Dr. Savage. And I'd just like to thank Jason and his team for setting this up for us. I really appreciate all that.
And close the meeting? No.
Meeting is